Ann Wolbert Burgess.
Your Honor, at this time I'd like to mark in exhibit number 354, which is a transcript of a tape recording. The recording is dated December 11th, 1989. And the transcript consists of 47 pages.
All right, 354.
Dr. Burgess, do you have a copy of Exhibit 354, a transcript of the tape of December 11th?
Yes, I do.
Now, before you testified the last time when you rendered certain opinions about Erik Menendez and what you believe were the reasons for the shooting of his parents, did you have a copy of a transcript of that same tape?
Yes, I did.
And had you had that for some time before you testified?
Yes, I did.
You understand that what we're going to do today is we're going to play that tape for the jury.
Yes.
And before you returned to Los Angeles in order to testify this time, did you have your own copy, in fact, of the tape?
Yes, I did.
Now, you did not have that before you testified last time.
That's correct.
And have you listened to the tape recording?
Yes, I have.
How many times have you listened to it?
At least 5 or 6 times.
And in listening to it those 5 or 6 times, did you develop in your mind an analysis of that particular tape?
Yes, I did.
Who are the voices, to the best of your knowledge, on that tape?
There are 3 voices on the tape. There's Dr. Oziel, there's Erik Menendez, and Lyle Menendez.
And in your listening to that tape, were you paying any particular attention to what's known as the interaction between those 3 people?
Yes, I was.
Now, were you in court yesterday in order to listen to the testimony of Judalon Smith?
Yes, I was.
And did you learn additional information concerning the making of the tape of December 11th, 1989 by hearing Ms. Smith testify?
Yes, I did.
And what information that you heard from Ms. Smith yesterday was at all important or significant in your evaluation and analysis of this tape?
Objection, improper opinion.
I'm not asking for an opinion, Your Honor.
Well, let's break it down. You're asking for things that she considered from Ms. Smith's testimony, is that right?
Exactly, Your Honor.
All right, without characterizing it in any particular way.
Right.
Why don't you ask it then?
Okay. What facts, if you will, that Ms. Smith testified to did you consider in formulating your evaluation of this tape?
One of the facts was the point that Dr. Oziel wanted the voices of the brothers on tape. That was an important factor.
Okay.
And that it was made at his request. It's a second factor.
And was there anything about the time frame at which this tape was made that was significant?
Yes, there was the time frame, I believe, was from 4 in the afternoon till close to midnight, about 8 hours.
And do you know how long the actual tape part is?
I believe the tape part is about 48 minutes.
And with respect to the taped part, how does this tape begin?
This tape begins in the middle of a conversation, and it begins with Erik Menendez speaking.
And how does it end 48 minutes later?
It ends essentially with Lyle Menendez. It just ends. It doesn't have any concluding statement or anything. It says end of tape.
Does it end mid-sentence?
Yes, yes, it does.
Now, you have told us when you were here before that you are a professor. You teach people at the University of Pennsylvania.
Yes, I do.
Do you teach how to conduct therapy.
Yes, I do.
Is that the main part of your teaching?
Yes, it is.
And as part of your teaching obligations, do you supervise the students who are learning to be therapists in the therapy that they are giving in the course of their, they give therapy in the course of their training, do they not?
Yes, yes, they do.
That's the more advanced part of their training?
Yes, it is.
And do you evaluate and supervise the therapy of the students that you teach?
Yes, not only do I do that, but I also, because of being division chair, am responsible for all of the instructors and their supervision of our students.
So other instructors also supervise the students?
Yes, they do.
And what physical means do you use to you don't attend all the therapy sessions, I take it?
No.
So how do you do your evaluation of the therapy that the students are giving?
Students are required to tape record all of their therapy sessions with their patients. They then bring the tape to the supervisor. The supervisor reviews all of the tapes, and then they come in for individual supervision, so that not only the tape comes in, but also their notes, and it is gone over in a detailed manner as to the process, if you will, between the student and his patient. That's on the audio tape. We also do videotapes of sessions, and we do one-way screen mirror of students with their patients.
So you watch sometimes?
Yes, we do.
Okay. Now, with respect then to these audio tapes, I take it then that you have a fair amount of experience in analyzing therapy sessions on audio tape.
Yes.
Now, you use the word process.
Yes.
Let me ask you this. In training future therapists, are there methods that they are taught, things they're supposed to do in dealing with patients?
Yes, there are.
And what is the significance of process?
Process is an important component of the therapy. It's divided. We divide it in terms of what's content, what is said during the session, as well as what occurs from an interaction standpoint, or process, or what may be not said, what may be hinted at, what may be going on with the patient that needs to come into the therapy session.
Let me see if I understand the dichotomy. There are two things. There's content, that's what is said, what is hinted at, what seems to be coming from the patient.
That is correct.
And then there is process, which is how the therapist interacts.
Right. What is said between the two parties.
The two parties being the therapist and the patient.
Yes.
Okay. Now we're going to return to this area of your training of therapists a little bit later on in your examination today, but for now, did you analyze this purported therapy session with Dr. Oziel and the Menendez brothers, both from the standpoint of content, what is said, not said, hinted at, and the standpoint of process?
Yes, I did.
And do you have an opinion as to, I guess, whether or not this is what you would characterize as a competent or acceptable therapy session?
Objection and proper opinion like the foundation.
Overall.
Yes, I do.
And would you tell us what that opinion is?
My opinion is this would be an unacceptable form for a therapy session.
And can you give us the reasons why you think this is an unacceptable form for a therapy session?
First, just on the tape alone, there's no introduction. There's no naming of persons. There's no consent given for the tape being made, and no necessarily any statement of why it's going to be made. Second of all, there are many missed pieces to follow up on that one would expect a therapist, to be able to follow. There are what we call missed metaphors.
If I can stop you for 1 second, I want to go back to the first point you were making as to the nature of the tape. Is it appropriate, or is it what you're training your therapist to do, to just start in the middle of a patient's sentence?
No, that's not acceptable.
Is there a commonly held theory about what are the most significant things, or what is the most significant time in a therapy session to learn what the patient's thoughts and feelings really are?
Yes, there is.
And what is that commonly held belief about the most significant time?
Commonly held belief is that within the first 5 minutes, what the patient initially brings up, and the theme, once the therapist can grasp the theme, that becomes very critical to the entire hour.
And that's the patient's theme, is that correct?
Patient's theme, yes.
Now, you to return to where you were, you said there were missed pieces to follow up on. Pieces being offered by whom?
Pieces being offered by the patient,
And who was it who failed to follow up?
the therapist,
Dr. Oziel?
Dr. Oziel.
And you said there were missed metaphors.
Yes.
Now, what role does metaphor have in therapy? If you could explain to the jury.
Yeah. A metaphor generally refers to someone by name or a type of person by name. And that can be what is called a metaphor for someone else or for a theme, but it should be followed up on as soon as the therapist questions it in his or her own mind.
Okay, so a metaphor is a patient making a statement about someone or something,
Yes.
and they're making a statement that's metaphorical. They really mean something else.
That is correct.
And the therapist is supposed to pick up and find out, what do they really mean?
To explore it more, not necessarily to identify it or to interpret it, but to give one more exploration of that.
Now, is therapy some kind of search for truth?
Yes, that's one way to describe it.
And is it typical in therapy that patients just come in and sit down and tell the therapist their true psychological state?
No.
Why is that not common?
Objection, Your Honor, this has been asked and answered in previous testimony.
I don't believe so.
Overruled, let me answer your question.
Patients come in with a variety of kinds of issues, and the purpose is to get some clarity, to get some organization, to get the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors into a cohesive order.
Do people who are seeking therapy ordinarily understand or have insight into their problems, their behaviors?
No, that is why they are in therapy.
So in the way you train your therapists, are they bound to accept, or should they be accepting at face value, the specific words that patients say?
No.
What is the whole reason for having a therapist there?
Is to explore and to bring into awareness and to give insight, if you will, as to what their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors mean.
And are they supposed to do that by formulating their own opinions and conclusions about what happened in the patient's life and telling the patient, here's your problem, and getting the patient to agree with them?
No, the therapist is not supposed to introduce their own thoughts. They are supposed to elicit that from the patient, use the patient's own words, and to explore with the patient areas that the patient brings into the session.
Okay. Now, you have indicated that part of your criticism of this session is the missed pieces, the missed metaphors. Are there other things about it that you find below the standard of your teaching and training?
Yes.
And what else is there?
Other things that are done is that the therapist introduces his own theories, if you will, his own ideas. He suggests, he leads. He also does certain things that would be considered certainly very bad technique. It's manipulative.
He's manipulative?
Yes. He is controlling in the session.
Is there any particular portion of the session, without too much elaboration because the jury will hear it, where this aspect that he's manipulative and controlling and using bad technique is blatant?
Yes, it comes a little bit beyond halfway through the tape, in which he changes the whole flow of the session and requires the brothers to look at each other and to have more of a face-to-face expressive kind of exchange.
And from your listening to the tape, do the brothers appear to want to do this?
The brothers are very clear to say they don't want it, they feel uncomfortable, they don't like it, and they protest quite a bit in that particular segment of the tape.
And does Dr. Oziel heed their protest?
No, he doesn't heed it, and he also laughs at them.
In spite of that, do they go along with what he wants in that segment of the tape?
Yes, they do.
Now, you said that he is suggestive and he is leading during the course of this tape.
Yes.
Are there times during the course of this tape when one or both of the brothers agree with him?
Yes, there are.
And are there more times when they reject what he is suggesting?
Yes, there are.
Now, just to summarize before we play the tape, strike that. Are there other things about how this supposed session was conducted that you take issue with?
Dr. Oziel ignores the feelings of the brothers. I've said that in a little different way. That's certainly bad technique.
Was it your opinion that Dr. Oziel just doesn't know how to be a therapist and is using bad technique?
Objection, calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Why was it significant to you that Ms. Smith talked about how and why, if you will, Dr. Oziel wanted to get the Menendez brothers on tape? How did that assist your evaluation of this tape?
Objection, improper opinion.
Sustained.
Why was that significant to you?
Same objection and argumentative.
Sustained.
On which grounds, Your Honor?
It's improper opinion.
Now, Dr. Burgess, you have previously testified that you were aware, both through testimony in this trial and through your interviews with Erik Menendez, that he never told Dr. Oziel the truth about why his parents were killed.
Yes.
It's an argumentative.
It's foundational, Your Honor.
Overruled, but let's get beyond these foundational questions.
Okay.
Part of it.
Now, does this tape basically corroborate what he told you?
Yes, it does.
Objection, improper opinion, move to strike the answer.
Sustained, the answer stricken.
Well, is this consistent with what he told you?
Same objection. Improper opinion.
Sustained.
Well, Your Honor, that's not an opinion.
All right, it is an opinion, obviously.
Does Erik Menendez, in the course of this tape, tell Dr. Oziel that he was molested by his parents and that he killed them in self-defense?
No.
Does Lyle Menendez, during the course of this tape, tell Dr. Oziel that there were a series of arguments because of the molestation of Erik by the father and that the killing was in self-defense? Do they use those words?
No, they do not.
Are there, however, metaphors used by both brothers throughout the course of this tape that were significant to you?
Objection, improper opinion.
How much more question do you have before you're going to play the tape?
About 2 more questions, Your Honor, because I'm about to do just one example and then we're going to play the tape.
All right, let's play the tape first and then get back to this and do it that way.
Well, I would just like an answer to that question and one example, and then I'm going to play the tape so that the jury knows what to listen for.
All right. Do you understand the question?
Yes.
Okay. You may answer it.
Yes.
Are there metaphors used
Yes.
by both brothers throughout?
Yes, there are.
And this is one of the things Dr. Oziel never follows up on.
That's correct.
In the very beginning of the tape, do you have the transcript in front of you?
Yes, I do.
You said that the copy. You indicated the tape begins in the middle of a sentence by Erik Menendez.
Yes, it does. They were both killed.
And why is that a metaphor when Erik is talking about that? How do you interpret that as a metaphor?
That is a metaphor that one would want to, as a therapist, would explore to find out what is in his mind that he's making this metaphor, that he's talking about this. Does it have any meaning to him? What else is in his mind about it? Not that one would make an interpretation, certainly at this point, but to see if that evokes some aspect of identification.
What do you mean by identification?
In terms, identification means that a person feels something, can align themselves with that other person, whether it has to do with what happened or feeling or thinking, thoughts, feelings, behaviors. All of that would be explored.
Let me see if I understand you. You would want to explore, if Erik Menendez refers to Bobby and John Kennedy, two brothers who were killed, you
Yes.
would want to explore whether he's identifying with them as a brother who feared being killed?
Yes, but not making that interpretation, but just to see what is in their mind, in the patient's mind about that, why he brings that up. And that would be a theme that also should be followed throughout. It's within the first 2 minutes of the tape.
So if you had a therapist under your training where a patient said this, and particularly if you knew that patient had made statements of being afraid of being killed, you would have followed up.
Yes.
So, Your Honor, at this time I propose to play tape recording, and may Dr. Burgess step down for the 48 minutes.
Certainly.
And we would stipulate that the court reporter need not transcribe the tape.
All right. And there are transcripts of this tape that will be distributed to the jurors. As I've said, in reference to other transcripts of tape recordings, these are only given to the jurors to assist you in following the words on the tape. The fact that you have these transcripts is just to assist you in listening to the tape recording. The conversation was tape recorded, and the recording is the evidence of the conversation, and the transcripts sometimes have errors in them. Although these transcripts appear to be pretty accurate, there are occasions when words are missed or omitted or misstated, and you are the judge of what actually is said on the tape, and these are only to assist you in listening to the tape, but your ears are the final judge of what is actually on the tape, hearing it yourselves. Just use these to follow along.
I believe people are prepared to stipulate that before the close of the case, if we can refine the transcripts to make them any more accurate, we will do so, and what would ultimately be admitted into evidence would be the best version that we can come up with.
I have submitted revisions.
Okay. Well, I'm sure the lawyers will keep working at it, but no matter how hard they work, it's my experience that no matter what effort goes into a transcript, there's always something wrong with them. There's always some words misplaced or whatever, and it's no one's fault. It's just the way these transcripts are prepared, and there's only so much time and effort can be done to prepare them. Okay. That's why we caution you to listen to the tape as the evidence of the conversation.
Your Honor, I have this turned up as high as it can go, but as the court knows, it's not perfect.
Okay.
The only people who had a bond really in the family two of you. I mean, you couldn't really bond either of you with your mom because of what happened with your mother in terms of all of the separation. She didn't communicate openly and honestly with you and didn't trust you ultimately, and you couldn't communicate with her and trust that she wouldn't tell your dad and trust that she wouldn't go to your dad. Your dad was like the enforcer, and your father didn't communicate honestly with your mother, and your mother was terrified of your father and would not communicate honestly with your father. The only people that were left to have a bond were the two of you. And throughout the time that
he found the first suicide note, that created a huge bond there, because he called me and so on and so forth. And then I immediately wrote my mother.
Yeah, I remember that. I found the suicide note and I started crying. I could not read it from below the phone because I started crying. Where did you find it? I found it in her drawer. I don't remember what I was looking for.
Under a book.
Under a book.
What did that?
And it said that she was going to. It said that she was going to kill herself, and that.
No, what it said is, I'm sorry I had to do this. I love you both, Lyle and Erik. I love your father. I just can't seem to deal with my own problems anymore. I want you to go ahead and have the life I thought I wanted for you and all the things I told you. And I'm really sorry it had to happen this way, but I have to do this. And blah, 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 blah. And at first, he thought it was just that my mother was leaving my father. And it was not until I told him that, don't get excited, but there's a strong possibility that what she's talking about, she's going to kill herself, that he became hysterical. Because at first he thought, well, I'm just leave the dad and wait for them. And now it was any day.
Any second. And
so,
it was also the fact that
at that point I was living alone in New Jersey in a mansion that they had left, and that was a tough time. But then I immediately approached my mother, and this is really aggravating. Well, because I was alone, and there wasn't.
Well, I think that the reason
it's a tough time because it was so far away from what people thought that you couldn't tell anybody. I couldn't tell my aunt. What are we going to do about my mother's suicide thing? I mean, you couldn't do anything like that, and it was just
the reason why she didn't. I in fact believe at that time was because she couldn't. She couldn't kill herself. I mean, you could take a gun and you could put your head into somebody, you could pull the trigger. It takes an amazing amount of energy. So she was sort of drained from learning about the affair, which was right after she learned about the affair, because I was listening in the next room, and for months and months and months, I would have to listen to my mother crying in the house. I would come home, my mother would be crying upstairs, and I would just be watching TV downstairs, and I would just hear the sobbing, and I couldn't go up and say what was wrong. And I would, because I didn't have that kind of relationship, I just never, I wish I had, and I look back on it now, and I wish I had that kind of relationship. But I remember when we first moved out and we were living in the condominium, right, I would hear right through the wall and I would listen about how they were about to have a divorce, and how my dad was telling my mom that they should not have a divorce. And I was just, that year, we were just going right through it, and from listening to her, she wasn't strong enough. What year was that? It was the year we first moved out. That was just a few years ago. Yeah, it was 1987. Well, when you ended up killing your mom, did you feel like you were sparing her? I mean, I know she was horribly depressed, and she was totally dominated by your dad. She was like a shell of the person. She had no identity or strength left anymore. You had been, I know that you had been responding to her as I think almost like a person who's become sort of pitiful. Yeah, that's a strong word, but is that how you felt? Well, no, we were doing almost in my mom's case something that first of all, there was no way, never could she live without my father.
That was something that we had to really, it was a big thing holding us back from killing my father, is that we thought that we would just kill Dad and eliminate the father. And see, the first step, when I found out the first suicide note, and then it got worse and worse, but was okay, I'll now support my mother, and Erik and I decided we would rally behind my mother instead of my father, who could take care of himself. He would understand. He would probably want us to rally against for my mother, because all along his view was, you protect your mother. She's your mother. You only have one mother. I may be your father, but your father is not as close to you as your mother. And that was his view. And even though I was never as close to my mother as Erik in the early years, and I sort of rallied behind my dad because we had more in common and so on. But so I decided, okay, I'm going to rally behind my mother. And I had a conversation with her. I wrote her a long letter saying if she ever wanted to leave Dad and whatever, she could move to Princeton. I'd live with her. She wouldn't be alone. There'd be no problems. There wouldn't be any big fight over custody of the children. We'd go with her if she wanted, and visit back and forth, whatever she wanted. And that didn't work because she cut me short immediately. There was no discussion. It was, Lyle, you're fabricating this. I started out by not wanting to really deal with her problems. I didn't want to know I found the note. It wouldn't be as effective. So I started to go through all the things that aggravated me about Dad and how he was suppressing myself and all these things. And he kept saying, no, she wouldn't even let me do that. She was, this is something you're fabricating. This, you know that really you bring up a lot of this upon yourself, Lyle. You don't realize this and you don't realize that. And it was just all untrue. She was the worst psychologist ever. She was not, in my opinion, a good open mother like she wanted to be. I felt that at that point she was so tainted by the fact that things were so horrible between her and Dad that she couldn't come out and say, you know, you're right, I'm having the same problems with my husband that you're having with your father, and maybe we should talk about it like a mother should. Even just out of curiosity of wanting to discuss something. She would rather discuss my girlfriend than my relationship with my father. Mm-hmm. And she was definitely with Dad on that issue. And so it was a dead issue within 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. I don't want to talk about it. Nope, you're wrong. You're overreacting. If you want to leave the family and you want to go off on your own, fine.
You had no one to really talk with us about it, except Erik.
Except Erik. And I sort of just said, all right, fine. She doesn't want to get divorced. Things seemed to almost get better, and then all of a sudden they just turned for the worse. And I think they turned for the worse after she found out that she had made a decision that she couldn't take it anymore, and that Dad didn't love her anymore. And
Is that the affair?
I believe it was after she found out about one of the affairs, like the main affair, that it had been 8 years long or whatever, or that maybe after she found out there had been more than one. It was some point where she just decided, boom, no way did he ever love me. I was wrong thinking that he loved me and he was just doing this because he needed to. And at this point I had stopped trying to help her divorce, so she didn't have my support anymore. I was, gradually being separated from her because she was no longer someone I could talk to about anything. Anything I talked to her about, I would talk to your father.
Did she actually get angry for bringing up stuff that was negative?
She was very cold. My mother was always very good in stressful situations. Very calm. This was obviously something that was an extreme stress for her. If Erik would have walked in the room when she was crying, or when I did, frequently, she would stop crying. I don't want to talk about it. It's my own problem. Blah, blah, blah.
She wouldn't let you in at all?
No, very matter of fact also about stressful things, which would mean if I started saying, which I would do would be to try to get her emotional and get her emotions out. Hey, I'm with you. I think we should leave Dad. He's crazy. He's doing this and this to you. It's obvious. He's doing this to me. Her reaction is, no, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with me. I think you're overreacting, Lyle. Here's all the things that Lyle, he bought you this car. He really wanted you to do this. He wanted you to do that. He's a loving father. I don't know what you're talking about. I think we should stop thinking about it.
How angry was that?
And, what?
How angry was that?
To me? Mm-hmm. Oh, it was extremely angering to me because she was putting me in a position to defend the things that my father was doing to me, and that wasn't even supposed to be the issue. Mm-hmm. It was the things that I had to get past first, the things he was doing to me, to get to the things he was doing to her, and there was just no way.
You couldn't even get her to acknowledge that he was doing anything to her or to you. I mean, that she wouldn't even, you were trying to protect her, and you were trying to say, Mom, we know what he's doing, and you were trying to tell her that he was doing the same thing to you and to her and to Erik, and she wouldn't acknowledge he was doing any of it and turned it around and actually blamed you as if you were an ingrate.
Right.
And she basically invalidated all of your perceptions and everything that you knew that was going on. She told you wasn't happening, got angry at you, blamed you, turned on you, and you ended up trying to protect her and getting punished and rejected, and as a person again told you were a bad guy, when really what you were trying to do is save her from what your dad was doing to you and your mom. I mean, that's what I'm hearing.
That's it. And I didn't try as much as I wished I would have tried. I didn't know a lot of it. I found out a lot of it later on. I found out more and more and more. And in my opinion, she got worse and worse and worse. And but for a while, I was traveling so much, I was away from the picture. I'd only hear about it from Erik. Oh, my mom freaked out about this. Oh, mom burst out crying about this and mentioned Louisa again and couldn't trust Dad here or there. And my reaction is, I don't want to be involved. It's a situation I can't help. And the alcohol, the drugs she would bring up to me, it was a sign that it was getting worse. And she would finally come to me and go, "You don't understand how much stress I'm under. I take 13 pills a day. I drink. Be careful about this Princeton issue or whatever. I'm not handling it well. I don't want to hear about this or that." And but there was no way I could open up to her about the real issue. I knew that she was seeking help, and I was hoping that it would help. From my girlfriend reading the letters that I found afterwards and before, her conclusion, and seems to be a lot of my relatives' conclusions, is that my mother could possibly have staged the whole thing and killed both of them herself, because she was unable to kill herself. And so she had somebody, she just said, "Okay, kill us at some point." And that's their feeling. I mean, obviously it's my feeling, I don't have, but I could see how they believed that, reading those letters. I kept thinking it over, almost as if it was true, almost as if I was like an instrument of hers in killing herself. That's where we sort of feel like, you mentioned before, that we were doing her and us a favor in putting her out of her misery, really, in that she could kill herself at any moment. And our reaction was, we knew that if she killed herself, my father was in trouble. We would physically not be able to handle that, because she was really a helpless victim. And I saw her going through her own.
I had in my mind that I would be the turning point. If my mother killed herself, I would hate my father for life, and there'd be a mission point back.
And I didn't know how my mother could live with it, and I tried not to think about it. Thinking about it was a very painful thing. That's why I don't have dreams about her now, and I don't think about it now. It's a serious sore spot, my mother, and that whole issue, because, even if I think about it for a moment, I say to myself, Dad was having an affair the whole time he was saying he was out late working, and she was at home bearing the fact that she couldn't be with her husband, they couldn't go to the dinner parties and so on, to take care of his kids and do all the things he wanted her to do, and she worked like a dog doing that, thinking she was helping their relationship for a better time. And then he would come home and say he's tired from working late and therefore didn't want to go to dinner parties, and she would cry about that, but her strength came from the fact that he was doing it for the family and for her, and so she was going to sacrifice. And then she realized that the 20 years of sacrifice was for nothing. He was going around with other women and so on, and that her whole basis for being able to go through it all was really a falsehood. And that I could see how, boom, you want to kill yourself. Can't handle, my whole life is a waste. I've wasted all these years, I could have been something. And our feeling, she would tell us about all the things she could have been and done and couldn't. Because she told us, Dad gave me an ultimatum. Take care of the kids and stay home and forget the acting and the hostess job that you were offered and all this other stuff, or I leave. And that was my dad's general feeling when she was crying, which was, hey, I want my life the way I want it. If I have to do things I don't want to do to satisfy the marriage, that's not the way I want to live. We'll go our separate ways. And my feeling was very strong. It's not the way it is. I told him flat out, you make sacrifices in order to have a relationship. You make compromises. It's the whole point of a relationship. you're each not going to get exactly what you want, so you try to come to, you go to a dinner party even if you don't want to because you haven't been able to go to one and because you've been working with. It was not his feeling at all that he should do that.
How did he respond when you said?
He responded by saying, well, I'm not prepared to do that. My feeling is that you have a relationship, one person controls the show. If I have to do things I don't want to do, even the smallest things, then I don't want to be a part of the relationship.
So it was his way or no way?
It's his way or no way, and he did that, and he was smoking a cigarette, and I remember the scene very well back in Pennington, and I was shocked by the statement, because I realized there if I pursued it, it could lead to a divorce. If I pursued it, his feeling was he would rather have a divorce than work out even a small thing like a dinner party. To me, it was amazing.
He had to have total control, or he wanted a divorce.
Right.
So, and is that...
And he thought that it worked best that way, that that's what kept the relationship going. Was that one person knew that this person was in control, or it was over.
Do you think you believed that, or do you think you needed to have that total control, and she sort of justified it with those kind of statements? How much did you feel that you were killing your dad because of what he was doing to you each, and how much did you feel you were killing your dad in part because of what he did to your mom, and what part was each? It
was not because of what he was doing to me, because I had already decided and had pretty much splintered off from my family, and tried many times. I decided at one point, I don't want another cent, I don't want to have anything to do with it. I tried to be self-supportive. I'm going to marry this girl and go have my own life. And it was my mother actually telling me, okay, you do that, but it's not because of what your father is doing. I want you to know that. That would anger me and bring me back in to help her out, because I realized she was so disillusioned and fucked up over the whole thing that she would actually think that. If she would have just said, I realize it's really strenuous, your dad is really doing all these things, it's terrible, I agree with you, maybe you should go off and do your own thing, it would have been a lot easier for me to do it. I needed her agreement that there was a problem, and she never gave it, was none. And I didn't think about it for a long time until Erik and I would get together and we would share what was happening in the family. And it was obvious my mother was deteriorating. We didn't want to get to a point where my mother killed herself and my father, we were left to deal with my father. That would be too hard on us almost, because I wouldn't want to. It would be hard on my father, and yet I couldn't let him get away with this, with what I would consider a murder that there was no way anyone would ever find out about. Mm-hmm. And so, for my mother's sake, I thought that we did it. We had to come, like I was saying before, we had to make a decision. It was one of the harder ones, and it was a separate issue. Okay, these are the reasons my father should be killed. There's no question. What he's doing is impossible to live with for myself, and for myself based on what he's doing to my mother. And
what were the things that he was doing? It's obvious to me that he was doing all kinds of stuff, from totally controlling everybody in the family, being completely cold-blooded about his decisions, considering everyone sort of an instrument of his own will. And there's a lot of stuff that your dad was doing, including talking about disinheriting you, or actually having said they did disinherit you, I guess, at a couple of points.
Well, that didn't enter into it too much, because I felt like Erik and I could handle it, mm-hmm. and he would expect us to handle it, and we would, we were strong, and I still felt he was an ideal father for the longest time, because I felt like our dad can't be with us, and he's strong, he's overpowering, but he gives us advice. Fathers who are friends to their sons, and in his word, like Wimpy, don't give. And he teaches us to be a man, and almost that he had raised us to be able to handle doing this thing that was necessary, and that we could deal with it better than any other 18 or 21-year-old in the country. Because he had trained us like basic training. My 21 years was a basic training course.
To do what?
On how to survive, and how to do what was necessary. And
to survive by living without him, or by telling him to leave?
By living without him. Mm-hmm. And that,
because you would have never had lived with him anyway. I mean, you never had that father-son closeness anyway. There's no. He had trained you mainly by being a disciplinarian and being tough, not by having a loving bond with you.
Exactly. I mean,
or to survive without having.
I felt the bond, though. I felt like I would go back and forth as to whether I was close to my mother or my father. When I really started to see my mother's problems, I'd be much closer to her. I hate my father. And then I'd get away from that, and when he had the problem, the heart condition and so on, I went in and I watched the Super Bowl with him, and we were close. And after the Calabasas issue, he cried, and we were together, and we were close. It was the first time he ever cried in front of me, and he felt much more uncomfortable. I used to feel very uncomfortable and cry whenever he told me he loved me, because it was an unusual thing, and I couldn't handle it. And because we were supposed to be man to man, and he would say that. He would say it matter-of-factly with no emotion, and it bothered the shit out of him. And I could not talk to him about anything concerning anything emotional without getting too emotional myself. And then it changed, and he became the one that, as I became more comfortable with it, I could bring up the fact, I love you and I'm doing this for this, and he could not handle it. Couldn't talk to me about it, didn't want to deal with anything like that, because it became a genuine emotion. If I expressed a genuine emotion, he would close up, and it would have hurt him. Like it would be a chink in his armor. He couldn't withstand it, and he cried after the Calabasas issue, after I said that, Erik, no, very sorry, no deal, and I'm sorry for all that trouble that you were caused through this whole issue. And he cried, and he felt for everything, and I think he cried a lot after the Princeton issue. And I came to him and said this and that. But with me, it was very cold. That crying I never saw. He would be very upset if I saw him crying or anything. Then don't cry. And so it came down to that decision, and we decided that my mother could not live without my father. And it was sort of nice for me to hear my cousin Sylvia.
Why did your dad have to die? I know from your mom why he had to die. How about for the two of you? What? It's clear to me how much he totally controlled the two of you, and it's also clear he was when he talked about you when you weren't here, he was very he was derogating about both of you in different ways. I mean, he would be judgmental of you in one way and judgmental of you, Erik, in another way. And it was real clear that at the same time he was saying he expected you, quote, to be men, that he was treating you as if you were disappointments and that you weren't strong enough. And that you were weak in one way and you were weak in another way. And I don't know if that came across and if that was part of what you felt in your relationship with him, that you could never be good enough, you could never do enough.
Sure. He even told Erik that the Calabasas issue and the way he handled it terribly. If he were in charge of it, he could have handled it way better than Erik. He made all kinds of mistakes, and you don't know how to do that either.
And so it wasn't even so much what you did, it was more that you were stupid in how you did it. You did it in an inferior and incompetent way.
But I still don't think it had anything to do with killing him. It had nothing to do with us. It had to do with me realizing a number of things that all culminated, which was, and it could have culminated at any point. And it was just a question of Erik and I getting together and somebody bringing it up and us realizing the value in it, which was, my father had the dream of now going into politics and was becoming a parent, and my mother would not be able to handle that. She had expressed over and over again how that would be the worst thing in the world for their relationship. What she wanted was for him to get away from his business and his dictatorship life with business and stressed out and all this other thing, and just sort of retire with her and be with her and get to know her. And if he went into politics, she would again be that shell of a showcase for him, and he would be boom, 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 be very busy, be time-consuming, and that would be his new love, politics instead of business, instead of her.
Instead of an affair.
And it would be his sort of affair, really. He had almost said, I felt like, and now I feel like, he had given up women and taken up politics. It was his new affair. It was just something that would be his passion. He was passionate, like, very passionate man, but not with her. She had expressed in her letters there was no passion. And yet, on the outside, everyone thought that their relationship was all passion, all consuming. And it was crazy. But my feeling was that with him deciding to enter into politics, it was her doom. It was over. There was no escape. And Erik and I were he was on the verge of going to UCLA.
No escape from what? When you say no escape from what?
No escape from being separated from my dad in an environment, or in a relationship where she had no identity. And She was she was being battered, and she at least felt comfortable in Princeton, New Jersey, and he knew that. And she had her friends, and she had a bonding and a relationship, and she was busy. And he took her out of that and brought her to California, and Erik and I knew it was devastating for her. I mean, it was really her death there. And if he went into politics, it would be another one. And it was just one blow after another, because moving to California was just the worst thing in the world, and he knew it. And
For him, for her,
for him it was great. He didn't care. It was just continuation of his career and this and that. And his wife was obviously going to go with him. There was no question. He made a thing where he would fly back and forth to New Jersey because he realized that this was a serious thing. His wife might not be able to handle this. I think he realized that. It was obvious, but he was very careful. Kitty, you're going to love it here. Come on. And Kitty was very sincere about the fact, I don't even know why she left. If there was a time for a divorce, that would be the best time to pursue it, because she had a real bond there. It was a real emotional breakup with that community and her. And she had never had a friend out here, had one friend or whatever, and never really saw her that much. And she never inquired into tennis lessons or leagues or community things or nothing. She got involved in this house that Dad was building, and that was it.
we're trying to push her into those kind of things, and for some she just...
And she would say, no, there's not enough money, I have to spend it on the kids.
Yeah, push her into,
She believed.
community activities. Don't you think she was probably too depressed and felt too powerless?
She was too depressed, and yet but she also, and it's an interesting thing Erik just brought up, she believed, Dad had her convinced, and it was an amazing day when this happened, that they had no money. That he had her convinced that they were poor, and that she could literally not afford to take tennis lessons and do different things for herself and buy herself nice stuff and never get a leather jacket for a couple hundred. I was buying leather $100 jackets on the allowance I was getting easily, and she said she couldn't afford one. She wished she could get one. And I remember a day when I said, come on, Mom, because I had bought something, how can you say I can't afford this when Dad just got a stock bonus of worth $6 million? And she said that she had no, and his salary is $1.3 million, and she had no idea. She said, what stock? What do you mean his salary is $300,000 or whatever it was?
He totally controlled her.
And she said, how do you know that? That's not true. And because we're cash poor. And I was shocked, and I said I knew it because I worked with the company, and it was right in the stock letter, which I didn't read, that said he got this much stock. And sure, his salary was $300,000 or $500,000, but his bonus every year was $850. No idea. She had no idea. And she did know about the life insurance thing, but that came afterwards. So I realized that he was withholding tremendous amount of financial information for her. My feeling then was, well, it's obviously in case they get a divorce, he doesn't want her to know what she's worth. But that enabled her to never buy anything, never do anything creative like that.
You see, when you said that, I think you're right about that, but there's another part of it, which is it also enabled him, again, to never allow her to have, your father was a totally controlling man, which meant that in the relationship, like you said, he needed to make all decisions. He needed to have her completely subservient. He needed to take all the will out of her, all the identity out of her, so that she was basically nothing but an extension of him and a shell of a person. So one way of controlling somebody so that they never develop any sense of identity, you tell them they have no money, they can't buy things, they don't have the ability to go and do community activities, they don't have the money to go out and develop an identity. It's a way of keeping total control of someone. So it wasn't only controlling the flow of information, but by telling her that they had no money, it was also a way to keep her totally imprisoned and totally unable to develop any strength. If she had a sense of money, she might have also had a sense of freedom. She might have also had a sense of being able to leave, to get away from him, to escape him. If she had a sense of no money and no power, and emotionally she was really stripped of all of her identity, then it would put her totally under his control, which is real clearly what I think ended up happening with your mom. So I think you're right that your dad, in case he got a divorce, didn't want to know how much money he had, but I think even more, your father's whole instinct to just completely control you. That he used money and power to control you. He used money and power to control you, Erik, and he used it absolutely to control your mom. And I mean, isn't that really after all? Isn't that what it was about, Tony? I mean, wasn't it about the amount of absolute control and the ruthlessness in terms of just completely, almost being like an automaton? He was focused on. I mean, it's like, do you think your father had any sense of what he even was doing to you? Or do you think that your father basically was so much on automatic pilot in terms of being focused on control and domination that did he not care? Or do you not know? What do you think? Erik, how about you saying something here? You haven't said a whole lot. What do you think?
I just don't like hearing it.
What does that mean?
I don't like hearing it.
You don't like hearing what?
I don't like hearing these things about my father.
Okay. What do you feel?
Upset.
Yeah.
Hurt.
Sad what?
Well, I pushed them out of my mind. And my father and my mother were two people that I love, and I just don't like them. It doesn't matter what they were or what they actually were. Whether it's a fantasy or it wasn't. They were very apparent in my mind before this and led up to the fact where I had no choice. I would have taken the other choice. Because I look back on it and realizing when people are worth and so on, I much regret it. I may not have had a choice at the time, but I regret it now. And I simply, I like the image that I had when I was 14 or so, where I had a mother and father that loved each other and loved me, and it was that kind of relationship. And I try to bring that back in my mind, because it was like that, and I like that. And it's simple and deep, and I don't like hearing my father put in this sort of way.
It's too painful. Talk about it. Thank you. Go.
He was somebody that I loved, and almost had no choice to do what I did, and I hate myself for doing it. And I understand why it was done when I became rational, because because of the love that I had for my mother, and how it was such a misconception of the family, no one else, and no one understood, and how having to listen to the fights, and simply the yelling and the screaming always taking place downstairs, and finding blood on the bed and different things. I just tried to rationalize it. And I break down every once in a while because it's really difficult. I love my father, and I'll never love anyone like him. And it's more difficult because of my mother, because I realize what amazing tragedy of her life was compared to what it could have been because of my father. And I hate him for that. And I love him. And it was something that was beyond control. And
What was beyond control? Did you have to tell me?
eventually it had to happen. It was basically ruining my life and I guess lives. And it was putting another through torture. And it got to a point where he was amazing. And he would do great things for me. And you know, I wouldn't understand why. I know that she loved me. Somehow it just
Couldn't ever tell you for sure.
no.
I was there. I remember when your mom called me and told me that your dad was disinheriting you because he didn't like how you were behaving at the table. And he thought you weren't being respectful enough. But he couldn't tell you because he never talked about feelings and he wouldn't talk about feelings. And you know, I remember telling you that and you didn't even look that surprised. I mean, that must have been what your dad was like for you.
Well, I'm sad because I look back on my life now with my parents, and I wish it would have been so much more different. I look back and I wish that my brother and I would have had an extremely close relationship, and I would tell her everything that happened over. I would tell her everything. And all my relationships with different people and everything. She wanted to know, and I was raised that I couldn't tell her. That she couldn't express to me, and I wish I had a closer relationship with my father. Dreams that I have. And
You couldn't be close to either one of them.
no, I guess we had a good relationship. From an early age, it's just, I guess, we're taught to go follow that, but you don't
You just don't want it.
have a close relationship.
You just don't talk about feelings and what's going on.
You keep it inside.
Did you ever try to tell your mom or talk to your mom about what your dad was doing?
No, I couldn't face that. I left that up to my brother. I couldn't face that. That actually told my brother over the phone, and he handled. I couldn't. I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to realize it. But I knew that if my mom had died, I would have to leave. I would have to leave. And it didn't matter because I always thought in my head that I could make all this money when it wouldn't make a difference. And I didn't, leaving wouldn't be a problem. I would have to do it. And I couldn't live with them anymore. And I love them. And I guess I was taught to love him because he was your father. And because I wanted to love him. And I guess that's why Lyle cannot probably face the fact that my mother had to be killed. And it was the only way out. It was the only way out for her, and that's why he cannot even face it. And he knows that feeling about it, and he goes, if you would have to face that and understand that, it would kill you, because it's just so sad. And I don't know, in ways I'm pissed off that he was like it. In other ways, I'm glad that he made me such a strong person, but I really can't say whether I would have wanted another kind of father. I just wish the relationship would have been different. And I don't. I mean, I have all kinds of things about it. And from a dream where I had was trying to convince two of my friends to shoot me. And they wouldn't do it no matter how hard I tried to convince them, so I took the gun that was in my hand and shot myself several times in the heart. And then I died. And there was a moment where it was just an immense pleasure. I was happy, and There was no tension on her mind, there was no stress, and everything was calm, and everything was great. And then I woke up in the morning and I was upset that I was alive because of the great feeling that I had when I was no longer alive.
What kind of feeling?
There was no oppression, and there was no more sadness to be had. And you no longer had to feel sad about your parents. And because it's just illness. And I guess one of the hard things about it is that everyone now, they don't know the truth and they can't relate. And that's difficult.
You can't relate to any of the feelings you have.
Exactly.
There's so much pain, and you know, it's so clear that both of you are relating to the not so much to the pain that you had in being in the family, although there was a lot of pain there. You both knew you could escape that. You were about to go away to school while you already were away, but the pain of knowing that your mother was going to be left behind and victimized, and that she was so defensive and protective of your father that even while she was being totally destroyed by him, that she was blocking absolutely even your love for her, and you're trying to help her, especially you, Lyle, well, trying to talk with her. If you were blamed for it, here you were loving her and trying to care for her, and instead you got blamed for it, and there was an absolute denial of what was happening, and yet you knew the pain she was in. You saw her totally deteriorating, and I mean, it's almost like, I mean, your love for your mother was, and the pain with her getting just totally brutalized over all those years was like it was a lot worse than the pain you went through being with your dad. Or you thought you could deal with your dad more than your mother. Your mother couldn't deal with your dad. Your mother had no ability with your dad.
Back going to college, I mean, it didn't matter. Even if I was in college, I remember when I was in college, I wanted to major in theater. And my mom wanted me to major in theater, but couldn't tell me that because she was an actress and she was a great actress. And so she had this love for theater. And when she saw me at stage, when I said Beverly, she loved it, and she wanted me to major, but I couldn't even bring it up to my father. I did once, and it wasn't, like, he thought I was kidding. It wasn't even something that was going to be even brought up. And my mom certainly never bring it up. And so what I was doing, what I was taking, I wasn't even going to decide. It was my courses, when I had an hour or two to select my courses, I would already have the sheet and already have it worked out. My dad would have already worked out what I was going to take. And so, I mean, it wasn't, there was freedom in my life, kind of, but my life would be structured and I would have freedom outside of structure. Right? And I mean, in signs of pain, I mean, Lyle and I definitely had different kind of relationships with our parents in different ways. We certainly dealt with it differently. Like I got scared with Lyle. When I wasn't sure. Lyle and I really didn't talk about how each other was feeling that much after this all happened. And we talked about getting internet about our feelings. And we probably related to more of them because we weren't supposed to. My parents didn't care. And he told me that he was very depressed and so on. And I didn't know it because, we hadn't talked about it. He was showing his feelings are different from mine. He wasn't as open about it. And I got worried. What does depression mean to Lyle? And could that mean he killed himself? And I cried about that one for a while.
Have you ever tell Lyle before? Is this the first time Lyle knows him?
Yeah, I don't
Why don't you look at him and tell him that you were really worried about him? Eric. No, come on, look at him. Tell your brother. Eric. No, don't be tough and strong. This is what you're trying to undo that happened. I'm not being tough and strong, I know. No, but he needs to tell you. No, let him do this. He needs to do this. And you know what? This is part of your way of undoing what happened in your family. Eric needs to express his pain his way, and he needs to tell you how much he loves you and how concerned he was for you. It's really important. I know you're stepping in to sort of save him, but you know what?
the best way for him to really be able to save himself and for you to get closer and to have that contact is for you to be able to talk to him and couldn't talk to him then. Right? Erik, can you turn towards Lyle and tell him what you feel? You can do it.
There's no reason to.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons. Come on. This is what it was all about. The reason this was all about, what this was all about, was you not having done this in games, but for you really to get to the place where you can deal with your feelings and not be a prisoner of whatever happened in the family. So, yeah, there's a reason. You love life?
Yeah, we learn to express each other in different ways.
You know, but you love life?
Yes.
You told me that between the two of you, if one of you was going to die, you'd rather you die and that Lyle left. Did you say that? Did you say that?
Yes.
What are you feeling?
Maybe that it didn't work out effectively.
I agree that Erik and I need to. Our whole family works behind closed doors, just like politics, and that's one of the love for politics. It's all closed game, and we still play a game that I wish I was very close to Erik, and we made all our decisions together. And when it came to advice, he came to me first. Just like
Remember how hurt you were when Erik told me what happened, and I remember the hurt, the pain, that he didn't talk with you about it first, that you felt really violated, and that was real painful for you. I remember that.
Yeah, the worst thing about it was that, there's so much, it could be something, it's just like the tragedy of the family. It could be another tragedy if we don't be very close, because, and tell each other things first and so on, and trust that we care. It's very hard to trust that you care. We've been taught to deal with it ourselves and then go a roundabout way and let up when it's necessary. If he feels it's really important for me to get this, he'll push that for me, but without me really knowing the real reason why he's pushing for me, that he loves me or whatever. And then we'll get real stubborn and hate each other about some little issues that I wish we wouldn't. I'll figure he'll think, or I will figure my girlfriend more over an issue than that he himself. Or I'm very conscious of his take sides with somebody else over myself, and then I'll say, well, screw you. You don't care, and it's easy for that to happen, and that's something that would be great if it could be worked out about. We've sort of worked out some strange relationship where we can convey that, like you said, without having to say it face to face.
Why don't you say it face to face right here, though? Why do you feel close to that?
Because you've never been taught to.
Well, wait. Turn your chest towards each other.
Well, you've never been taught to. No.
Erik.
No, I feel like comfortable. I'd rather not.
Erik. Wait. Okay. What am I here for? Aren't we
For
trying
some reason, it seems like I can say it to almost anyone else except for my family.
Okay, but wait a minute. You're trying to learn how to handle that and trying to undo that. You've got one family.
I think it stems from the reluctance stems, and the mind stems from a pride issue.
But
He's still afraid that I may not feel the same way, and pride will become. That's the way I would say I felt. Yeah, I love Erik very much.
Can you tell a little more to us?
I feel like too.
Oh, God. Come on, you can do this. I know you
We
do.
hate that hugging shit, by the way. We fucking hate that.
You know what? I don't care if you do. I don't care if you do it. Just because you said that. Come on. No. You know what? You may have trouble with it. All right. Come on. You have trouble with it. You do. You do. You know what? Look, all the stuff that happened, that you want to reverse the fact that you couldn't be close, if you let me, okay? What I want to do, if you let me, okay? And you trust each other enough, and you trust me enough, I don't want to have this be something where we're doing something that has to do with legally protecting you, because that's not what we're doing here. What we're really doing is trying to help you undo what happened and help you create what never got created, so that what happened for a reason, and that you now can create something between the two of you that was supposed to be there to begin with. Because you're what you have left. You're your family now. And, you know, you don't want to be a victim anymore of what happened. And I know how much Erik loves you because you were not here. Is it okay if I tell him that? Is that all right? He just nodded and said yes. He told me that if something happened, if anything happened and one of you had to die, he would much rather it be him than you. He would much rather that, you know, if something happened to him, he doesn't even, Erik's got all kinds of problems with having anything to do with any money and anything as a result of all this. Feeling real guilty and badly about it. He's having all kinds of difficulties with it. And, you know, he said to me over and over again how much he loves you and how much he would really do anything for you, and, you know, including many. If the point of the had to go, he'd rather it would be him. And I know that it's not easy for Erik to tell you that with words, but you know what? You're talking about it being real sad with your mom. But it would be just as sad if the two of you didn't get to the place where...
I feel like that almost has happened a couple times. It's obviously happened twice. Once where I was depressed and could never really convey it. And I was close to suicide and felt it would be the best way out and a nice way out. And wishing that somebody would be good enough to have me killed. And then there was a time, then Erik also going through a period where he never expressed to me that me saying that I was in Princeton, was going to stay in Princeton and go to school and not be part of the tennis tour would be emotionally devastating to himself. And his reaction is, okay, fine, if that's what you want to do it. I don't know, I think it's fine. And that's it. And me actually being hurt by the fact that he didn't care enough to say that he wishes I was on a tour. And so we both walk away majorly depressed. That he doesn't care if I'm on a tour or not. He just thinks it's the wrong decision intellectually. And Erik is not going to get a tour with me. He doesn't care. And, you know, that... And it can lead to a suicide. And, you know, just like, you know, it led my mother. And I still think Mom's was a suicide. Because, you know, I feel that in her letters to Erik and I, she gave me the permission. And the burden seemed to continually be handed to me. Erik handed me it to talk to Mom. Dad handed a lot of things to me. She had given me permission to please carry out her suicide. And that it was obvious that she had decided in her mind she wants to die. She can't do it. And she doesn't want to talk about it. And there's nothing that I can do to help her. There's nothing anyone else can do. And she very much doesn't want anyone else to know. Doesn't want me to go to her Uncle Brian, or if I look back, I wish I would have done, and just said. I mean, I feel like if I would have said to Uncle Brian, this is the situation, he would have done something. I feel that I have a lot of anger toward my relatives, my uncles, my aunts. My Uncle Carlos and Aunt Terry, who knew about what was happening to my mother and did nothing. I just think that they were cowards. That what Erik and I did took courage beyond belief, beyond strength. There was no way I was going to make a decision to kill my mother without Erik's consent. I didn't even want to influence him in that issue. I just let him sleep on it in a couple days. Because I'm in a very good position to influence Erik on a lot of things. Because he knows that I care and a whole number of issues, and I can talk eloquently and whatever. And but when it came to that issue, I wanted nothing to do with it. It had to be his own personal issue. He felt the same way I did about killing Mom. And you know, I feel angry toward my relatives. Why didn't you do something when you knew what was going on and I didn't? And now when I found out, you know, I did something about it. I did what I thought my mother would want me to do, which is please kill me. And I can't, you know, and I just couldn't just kill my mom, and that would be ridiculous. I wanted to get rid of the source, so I couldn't live with that. Nobody could. And in a way, I'm happy that people say afterwards, you know, there's no way that your mother could have lived without your dad. I'm glad, even my mom's side of the family says, I'm glad that if your dad I know about it all, and the people that do know it all, my mom's side of the family doesn't, they think it's because they love each other so much, but my mom's side of the family, Sylvia and a few other people that have read some of the letters and know some of the stuff, feel the same way, that she couldn't have lived. She wouldn't have wanted to live. She wouldn't think of it as I wish she would think of it as, I'm free, now I can take the money, go back to Princeton, I can recover and remarry, which is what I wanted for her. That, it was only after that ceased to be an answer, ceased to be a way out, that it was a dangerous situation where Erik and I realized at any point, sort of subconsciously, the go-ahead was given to kill us. Kill me before you leave. And basically leave our lives and go your separate ways.
Was she rushed to the hospital?
You mean after the car accident?
No, when she took too many pills.
And when was this?
That's what you told me about it.
In New Jersey?
Yeah.
Back in New Jersey, yeah. Took the wrong pills or something. And went bad, was rushed to the hospital for some reason or another. But the New Jersey stuff, I didn't realize what was going on. I was in high school. I was dealing with my mom on a daily basis, and it wasn't as bad as when I was no longer around. She had something to occupy her time. All of a sudden she did. Erik wasn't on. So things got really, really worse. She didn't know about the affairs then, I don't think.
No, she didn't know about the affairs, I think, until she...
And it was bad enough that she was really having a hard time dealing with her marriage just because of what my dad was putting her through without even knowing that he was putting her through it for a completely devious reason. She was in bad enough shape, and everybody, my tennis coach, who was sort of a psychiatrist for me back then, Fred Warner, would say, "God, I really feel for your mother. She opens up to me a lot, and she's just tormented by her father, and I would hate to have her life. Her life is terrible. And your dad is just a typical serious business executive." And he mentioned over and over that my dad could be having affairs, and I dismissed it entirely because I didn't think my dad was capable of that. And but getting back to what Erik was feeling that I wanted to say, it would be great if we were able to work on it, because even our relationship, because even the planning out of this, the reason it took such a short period of time to figure it out was, one, because it could have happened at any moment. All the thinking beforehand was done, really.
Yeah, I knew what you felt.
We knew what we felt, and we knew everything about that. Honestly, I never thought it would happen, even though I had thought about it. But it was done so quickly and so sort of callously almost, because one, if you thought about it too much, the feelings of not having your parents around and so on would get in the way of what was more important, which was helping your mother, really. And thinking about that and feeling toward her, it was so easy to separate yourself. I'd done it for too long into your own life and go, I want to deal with my mother's agony. And it was sort of a cowardice way out. And for one moment before I went back to school, I had a chance, even though my life was going really well, and to show some courage, I felt, and help Erik and I, help my mother. I'm doing well, you're ready to go to UCLA, we're psyched about a lot of things, but we can't ignore the fact that my mother has to live with us. And it was that. Erik was that. I mean, I remember when we had to go down wherever to take care of an important issue concerning it, he said, I can't do it, I've got to practice because I have a tournament coming in. It was completely blocking that, and I was, I couldn't even tell him, but I was feeling, he doesn't realize the impact of what he's doing. He wants to take care of this problem and wish his life was the same and he still had normal parents that he can never have. He doesn't realize that what he's doing, there will be no more tournaments like that. There's going to be no more, all the little good things that are in a relationship, and I think one of the biggest pains he has is that you miss just having these people around. I miss not having my dog around, if I can make such a gross analogy. That, whether I hated the thing when it was around now and I've given it away, now that it's gone, I miss all the things. That we had a boating trip right before the incident, and it had nothing to do with the main problem, which required a lot of courage. But miss not having my father. And it's almost worse after I find out more and more about how he was such a genius and all the things he was able to do, and more and more about the agony of my mother. That instead of her being a shell, I realized she was really feeling a lot of emotion that I wish I could have now confronted her and discussed things with her that I can't. And I didn't know and think I would ever have to do.
All right, the tape has been played, and it's around 8 minutes to the hour. Let's take our lunch break, and we'll resume at 1:30, ladies and gentlemen. Don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll see you all back here at 1:30.
Yes, I both supervise and I also supervise and make sure that the other instructors that supervise and instruct the other students in the division, I'm responsible for that.
So you're above all of the instructors, all of whom are also supervising. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct.
Okay. Now, how do you supervise a student giving therapy? Do you actually sit in on the therapy sessions, or is there some other method?
No, I do not sit in on the sessions, but we require our students to audio tape every session that they have with the patient. Some students also are videotaped, and some students are, there's a one-way screen where they have an earphone that is plugged into the supervisor behind the screen so that the supervisor can give immediate feedback during the session.
So that if the student therapist does something wrong or misses something, the supervisor sort of buzzes them and says,
That's
what?
right. Well, we buzz them and say what is, either they've missed something or go back and explore this, whatever we're trying to convey, so they can correct it right during the session.
Okay. But would it be fair to say that most of the supervising of the student's therapy is done by reviewing the audio tapes that they've made of the therapy sessions?
Yes, because students have multiple patients, so that becomes the easier way of doing it with the numbers of patients that students carry.
Okay. Now, in addition to listening to the audio tapes, do you also review the notes that the students make of these therapy sessions?
Yes, students must also bring in copies of their notes so that the supervisor has a copy and the student has a copy, and the supervisor has already listened to the tape. That has to be provided prior to supervision.
Why is it that the students have to do notes when everything's on audio tape?
Because they need to learn how to take notes, what are the important things to capture in a session, and you have to really advise them and teach them how to do that. They also have to write reports, so that there's even an added factor to the work with the patient.
Now, when you're teaching people to be therapists, are you teaching them how to listen to patients?
Yes.
And what is the key to how to listen to patients is it the same, for example, as a police officer listening to someone they're interrogating, or is it the same as the way a jury listens to a witness testifying, or is it somehow different?
It's somehow different. The listening, first of all, listening is a very critical therapeutic tool. And it's almost more important than what one says. You have to be able to listen at multiple levels, because people are coming in and in their discussion or they're talking of their problems or whatever they're in the session for, the therapist must be able to analyze at two levels, both what's called the content level, what is actually being said. But equally important is to get at material that is not being expressed, but may be alluded to through various techniques that people have of talking.
Is it your experience both as a therapist, and of course you have functioned as a therapist for many years,
That's correct.
and as a researcher in the field and as a teacher, that patients do not just come into a therapist, sit down and say, here's my problem, here's my real feelings, here's the dynamic of my life?
No, they do not.
What's the therapist's purpose? I mean, a lot of people don't even believe in therapy, but what's supposed to be the purpose of the therapist?
The purpose of therapy is to look at the thoughts, feelings, and behaviors of a person and to be able to pull all of that together and keep the meaning and the understanding, for patient understanding, sometimes it's called insight, as to why people behave as they do, why they talk or feel as they do, and to give the patient an understanding of these components of their life.
Now, when your students do these therapy sessions with their patients and you are analyzing it, are you grading them on what they do?
Yes, we do grade them.
Do you reject people from your program if it appears they simply cannot develop appropriate therapeutic methods or techniques?
Yes, we do.
Now, did you come back to testify at this point in order to give us your opinion, in part, of a particular tape recording in this case?
Yes, I did.
And is that a tape recording of December 11th, 1989, which has as the speakers L. Jerome Oziel, Lyle Menendez, and Erik Menendez?
Yes, I did.
And did you, how many times have you listened to that tape?
I've listened to the tape, I think 5 or 6 times.
And even before you testified the last time, when you were here for your first appearance, had you read a transcript of the conversation contained on that tape?
Yes, I had.
And did I ask you to analyze the information on that tape from the standpoint of whether or not it was, based on the standards that you teach, a competent or adequate or appropriate therapy session?
Yes, you did.
And did you form an opinion on whether or not what went on there fit the standards for a therapy session?
Yes, I did.
And what was your opinion?
My opinion that it was unacceptable as to meet the standards of psychotherapy.
And what were the reasons or the basis for that opinion that it is unacceptable?
Okay. There are several reasons. First of all, there is no identification on the tape as to who is on the tape. There is no consent given by either of the 2 patients that are being taped.
On the tape.
On the tape, right, and that is something that should be there because you are taping them. There is no ending, there's no timing, there's none of the factors that go into just the mechanics of taping. Second,
Let me stop you for one moment. You testify a fair amount in court cases, do you not?
Yes.
So you have extensive what's known as forensic experience with the court system.
Yes.
And is it your understanding that Dr. Oziel had said to the Menendez brothers, well, strike that. You were here yesterday for the testimony of Judalon Smith.
Yes,
right?
I was.
And you're aware that she attributes to Dr. Oziel a statement that he tried to make the Menendez brothers think that he could help them if they ever got arrested, and that this tape would somehow be useful.
Yes, I heard that.
And are you familiar with the standards of in the forensic psychological field for preserving evidence or preparing evidence for presentation in court?
Yes, I am.
Now, you have just described a problem with the form of this tape. It doesn't have any introduction. It begins in the middle also. I mean, it begins in the middle of something.
That's correct, yes.
And it ends in the middle of something.
Yes, it does.
And does that violate the standards that you're familiar with for evidence, for forensic evidence to begin
Yes.
with?
Yes, it does.
Does it go beyond that, though, and even violate the standards for the preservation of psychotherapeutic material?
Yes, it does.
Now, apart from the format that this tape is sort of just starts and ends, is there other things based on what is actually said and done on this tape that led you to your opinion that it was unacceptable as a therapy session?
Yes.
And would you tell this jury now those things?
Well, some of the things are what are done by the therapist on this tape. For example, changing the subject. That is a violation in terms of you're supposed to elicit the information from the patient and work with the patient's material and use the patient's language. So even introducing language which would be leading and suggestive is not considered good technique in psychotherapy. There are aspects in the tape in which you can see the control being used by the therapist.
By Dr. Oziel?
Correct, by Dr. Oziel. There is a part about halfway to 3/4 of the way through the tape, in which there is a technique that he attempts to use, in which both of the brothers protest it. They don't want to do it, and yet it is done over their protests. Not only is it done over their protest, but the therapist also laughs at them and completely disregards what their feelings are about this particular face-to-face technique.
Is that face-to-face technique what you and I have referred to as the touchy-feely part? Lyle, look at Erik. Erik, look at Lyle. That thing?
Okay, counsel, let's not argue it and just ask a question in the proper way.
Yes.
Is that touchy-feely part?
Yes, it is.
And given the context of everything else that's being said on that tape, did you find that it was appropriate at that point in time when they're discussing the killing of the parents for Dr. Oziel to do that?
Objection, improper opinion.
Overall.
I felt it was inappropriate, yes.
Inappropriate.
Inappropriate.
Now, you've indicated it was over the protest of the two patients, of Erik and Lyle Menendez.
Yes.
Okay, and that's on the tape. They're saying they don't want to do this and they're protesting it.
Yes.
Do they, however, nevertheless do it?
Yes, they do it.
Now, you said that one of the things that you criticize about this tape is that the therapist is being suggestive, using his language, he's leading, he's controlling. With respect to this part, but not just this part, do you find any evidence of him being a manipulative person in the context of this session?
Objection, compound.
Overall.
Yes, I do find it manipulative.
Now, what does that really mean in this context, that the therapist is being manipulative? What's he doing?
What the therapist is doing is to get the patient to do what he wants him to do, rather than allowing the patient to present and conduct the session as freely as he possibly can.
And in your experience and in the way that you train your therapy students, is therapy in one sense a search for psychological truth, if you will?
Yes, for the person's truth, the aspect that the person is presenting, yes.
And are you likely to unearth psychological truth if the therapist is manipulating the information, is trying to get patients to agree with him rather than following up on what they're saying?
Right. It does not go towards the patient. It is only serving to fulfill the therapist's needs.
So are you likely to find out the truth in this kind of a situation?
No.
Now, apart from what you've already said, were there parts on this tape where there were what you would consider to be clues, pieces of information that should have been followed up, and metaphors?
Yes, yes. Those are things that we also teach to the students to look for.
You teach the students to look for such things coming from whom?
Coming from the patient.
And are they supposed to, when a patient says something that seems to have significance, follow up?
Yes, precisely, to get into that, to explore it more, to expand the thoughts, feelings, and of the patient.
Okay. And was that done here? Were there clues to underlying feelings that were not followed up by Dr. Oziel?
Yes, there were.
Were there metaphors that one or both of the brothers used that he did not explore?
Yes, there were.
Would you explain for this jury what we mean by metaphors in this context?
The metaphor means that the patient has referred to usually to someone, either someone within their own context or to someone that is well known outside of their context. It's just the identification of a person. And rather than being able to talk about really what they're thinking of, they just make this, they make the metaphor. And it's up to the therapist to find out what the real meaning is to the patient.
Well, is that sort of, just to give it an example, is that sort of akin to when someone calls up a mental health provider and says, listen, or a lawyer or a doctor, listen, I have this friend who has a problem.
Yes.
And really what's going on is the person themselves has a problem, but they're distancing themselves from
Yes,
it.
because they don't know how the person's going to react. And until you really know how the therapist or whoever is talking, they won't be able to fully admit that it's really their concern.
Okay. And did you find even in the very first page of the transcript, in the first opening moments of what's on this tape, Erik Menendez using such a metaphor?
Yes, I did.
And what was the metaphor that he was using? Who was he talking about?
The metaphor had to do with John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, and he's referring to this right in the, I think, line 3 or 4 of his first opening statement that comes on the tape.
And does Dr. Oziel follow up on this reference to the Kennedys, or does he immediately change the subject?
Objection, pause for improper opinion on the part of the witness.
Sustained.
Now, on the face of it, does Dr. Oziel ask any questions related to what Erik has said about Bobby Kennedy, Jack Kennedy?
No.
Objection, the tape speaks for itself.
Overall, the answer will stand.
And is that an example of a metaphor that he does not follow up on?
Yes, that's one example.
Your Honor, may we approach?
Yes. We now have both juries in the courtroom, and you may continue with your direct examination.
Dr. Burgess, at 2 different times today, you testified in front of the juries that you were critical of the method that was being used by Dr. Oziel on this tape of December 11th for a variety of reasons. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And one of the reasons you said was that Dr. Oziel is suggesting things and using his own language and not following up on what the patients are saying.
Correct.
And do you see a pattern in this tape of points at which the patients, Erik and Lyle Menendez, agree with the suggestions being made by Dr. Oziel?
Yes, I do.
And do you see other points when the patients, and most particularly Erik Menendez, disagree or ignore completely what Dr. Oziel is saying?
Yes, I do.
Now, what I propose to do, strike that. When you do your analysis of your students' therapy, you're analyzing, on the one hand, their technique. Is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Are you also analyzing it from the standpoint of whether or not, based on their technique and how they deal with the information that a patient's giving them, whether or not you could have any confidence in ultimately the information that's developed in one of those therapy sessions?
Yes.
And did you make the same kind of assessment with respect to this tape? That is, whether or not you could find the information on the face of it, if you will, the content coming from Erik and Lyle Menendez to be reliable?
Yes, I did.
And what was that assessment?
Objection, improper opinion.
Sustained.
Would you rely upon informing your opinions, any opinions, in a forensic case, information developed in what you consider to be an inappropriate therapeutic setting?
Objection, same objection.
Sustained. It's vague what you mean.
Okay. Let me ask you this. Are you mindful, having listened to the tape 5 or 6 times, having read the transcript many, many times, of what the ultimate story is that's supposedly put forth on this tape as to why Mr. and Mrs. Menendez were killed?
Yes.
And what, as you've read it and listened to it, is your belief in what that story is that appears on this tape?
Objection, irrelevant.
It's foundational, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Well, Your Honor,
It's foundational to what? Why don't you ask that, the next question? Let's see if there is a...
well, let me just, maybe if I ask it as a leading question, I can move on. Does it appear from this tape that what the brothers are agreeing to is that their mother was killed in some form of euthanasia or mercy killing?
Objection, improper opinion.
Sustained.
Your Honor, it's not being
It speaks
asked.
for itself, so...
Well, I'm not sure it does. That's the point.
Yeah, that's, that would be her characterization, and it's really irrelevant. So ask the next question.
Do you find from analyzing this tape that you are presented with a theory for why these parents were killed that makes any psychological sense to you as a therapist?
Objection, improper opinion.
Again, it goes beyond the nature of the examination that we indicated at the sidebar.
Well, let's try it this way then. in trying to determine whether or not what appears on this tape is reliable, okay? Oh, I'll strike that. Did you try to determine whether or not what Erik and Lyle Menendez were saying on this tape with respect to supposed motive for killing their parents was the truth?
Objection, improper opinion.
You can answer that question, yes or no.
Is that-
Yes.
You were trying to determine that, is that
Yes, I
correct?
was.
And is examining the method by which the information is, to use the word loosely, developed on this tape important in your making a determination as to whether or not it's the truth?
Yes, it is.
And is it understood in the at least the teaching community, training therapists, that if the method used isn't appropriate, you're not going to get the truth?
That's correct.
Okay. What I propose to do at this point then, Dr. Burgess, you have a transcript in front of you that has your notes on it, correct?
Yes.
What I plan to do is go through it and have you point out those areas where you take issue with the methodology that's being used, and for you to give the reasons for what's wrong with what's happening at these various places on the tape, okay?
Yes.
All right. So let's...
An objection to this is improper opinion.
I haven't heard that question yet.
All right.
I thought that's what we just decided.
Let's ask a question.
Okay, now you've testified in front of both juries that in the very beginning, when the tape starts up, the voice that's on the tape is Erik Menendez's.
Yes.
And he's making some reference to the Kennedys.
Yes.
And you've testified there was a metaphor in there. He's referring to Bobby and John Kennedy was, I think you testified in front of the blue jury, some form of identification on his part.
Yes.
Identifying with
Yes.
Bobby and John Kennedy. And you're not making the interpretation, are you, that he identified with them because they wound up dead?
No.
But is that something you would have wanted to, at least as a therapist, pursue?
Yes, this is the area you would want to pursue.
Why is he talking about the Kennedys?
Yes, because it's the very first major theme that comes up in this tape.
Okay, now you don't know what might have preceded this in the many hours that Dr. Oziel and the Menendez brothers were together.
That's correct.
All right, but you can only deal with what you got.
Right.
For some reason, somebody turned the tape recorder on here.
Objection, false or speculation?
Sustained.
Well, obviously somebody turned on a tape recorder.
All right, it could have been a tape recorder was already on and a tape was played and recorded, another one put on, so it's
Oh,
speculation.
there might have been other tapes.
Right.
Excuse me, historical comment.
Let's ask another question, please.
Have you had any information that there were any other tapes made on this particular day?
No.
Okay. Now, does Dr. Oziel, and now I think all the jurors, does the gold jury have their transcripts? Everybody should have a transcript.
Assuming we have a sufficient number of transcripts.
We do.
All
We
right.
kept the ones that the gold jury had last Friday around.
Okay, we did have a certain deficit in number.
We have some. Okay, if everyone has it, then we're on page 1 right now, correct? And starting at line 19 is the first actual thing that Dr. Oziel says after Erik has been talking about first the Kennedys and things he says about himself and his brother, whatever they became, et cetera, et cetera. Now, does Dr. Oziel at this point follow up in any sense with anything that Erik has just said?
No, he does not.
And what does he do?
He changes the subject.
And when he changes the subject, how would you characterize the manner in which he is talking to these patients?
He really begins to give answers for them. He talks about his ideas about the family. That's what the next several lines are.
Now, if you turn to page 2, you note on page 12, Dr. Oziel makes the suggestion that the only people within this family that, for whatever his theory was, were left to have a bond were the two brothers.
Yes.
Now, how does Lyle react to that statement of Dr. Oziel's, as you see on line 15?
Objection and proper opinion.
But you're asking what was said?
I'm asking, well, I'll lay it down. Not what was said, but what does he do from what you can see here, verbally?
Objection and proper opinion.
It's not an opinion.
Well, the words speak for themselves. What is
Well,
it that
does
you're
he agree with this suggestion of Dr. Oziel's?
Objection calls for speculation on the part of the witness.
asking? Right. Overruled.
He does not agree. He continues. What Lyle does is to talk about the suicide note.
Well, let me call your attention to this. Dr. Oziel suggests the only people that were left to have were a bond were the two of you.
Yes.
Then do you see Lyle saying, well, he, meaning Erik, found the first suicide note. That created a huge bond there, picking up on Dr. Oziel's language.
Yes, they are.
Objection leading.
Overruled as to that question, but let's not lead the witness.
Now, is this something that this is Lyle picking up on some language Dr. Oziel is using, is that correct?
That is correct.
And is this a pattern that you see repeated through this tape,
Yes, it is.
where Lyle agrees with things that Dr. Oziel is saying?
Yes, he does.
Now, do you notice at the bottom of page 2, oh, by the way, have you ever conducted therapy with more than one patient at a time?
Yes, I have.
And do you train people in conducting therapy with more than one person at a time?
Yes, I do.
And is there any training on the subject matter of whether you should allow people to constantly interrupt each other?
Yes, there is
And
protocol.
What's the protocol?
You're not supposed to have people interrupt other people.
And are therapists supposed to interrupt patients in order to get their own ideas across?
No, they're not.
Let's look at the bottom of page 2. Do you see line 28? Erik Menendez is talking.
Yes.
And what happens there?
Objection calls for speculation on the part of the witness. The tape speaks for itself.
Sustained.
Did you notice in hearing the tape that he was interrupted there by his brother?
Same objection, Your Honor.
All right, we don't need to have these objections each time. It's clear that counsel is asking or pointing the witness to a particular phrase for a purpose of follow-up questions.
Correct.
Objection overruled, but if we can get to the question itself.
Right. Is he interrupted by his brother there?
Yes, he is.
And is that a pattern that continues throughout the tape, that Erik Menendez is interrupted by his brother and by Dr. Oziel
Yes, it is a pattern.
until the second half of the tape?
That is correct.
Now let's turn to page 4. And you can see there on line 6 is that another point at which Erik Menendez is interrupted by Lyle.
Yes.
Now, you had talked that one of the things that's wrong with this as a therapy session is that there are clues and hints being dropped that are never followed up by Dr. Oziel.
That is correct.
Calling your attention to that portion between line 7 and line 11 by Lyle Menendez on page 4, is there something there that you characterize as a clue that was not followed up?
Yes.
And what is it?
The statement that you couldn't tell anybody, that you couldn't identify some of the people he couldn't tell, that's not followed up on. Not over who you couldn't, but what you couldn't tell.
And is that significant when you're talking to a patient where there's been an extreme traumatic event, when that patient makes some reference to inability to tell or secrecy?
That's right.
Moving down the page, and we're going to skip that until later, but down the page until line 25 on page 4, is that another point at which Erik is being interrupted, this time by Dr. Oziel?
Yes, it is.
And right after that is Erik talking again, and again interrupted by Dr. Oziel.
Yes, it is.
And when Dr. Oziel interrupts on these parts, does he interject? Does he interrupt to ask to follow up with what Erik is saying, or does he interrupt to put in his own theory?
He puts in his own theory.
And is that what he does at the top of page 5?
Yes.
Now, do you see on page 5 at line 17, Dr. Oziel saying, when you ended up killing your mom, did you feel like you were sparing her?
Yes, I see
Is that a significant point in this supposed therapy session?
Yes, it is.
And why is that particular point so significant?
That's an example of where he is suggesting, he is leading, he is putting his own ideas forward, his own theory, if you will, forward.
Is this the first time, in fact, that the whole issue of killing one of the parents is raised?
Yes,
And it's raised by Dr. Oziel.
yes.
And besides asking the question, the suggestion in the question, did you feel like you were sparing her, does he then go on to do something else that you find is inappropriate?
Yes.
And what does he go on to do?
He then goes on to describe his opinion of her being depressed, totally dominated. He uses language shell of a person. She had no identity or strength. And he ends with the word that she was pitiful.
And is that appropriate for a therapist who's trying to actually find out what patients feel or think about a person to give his analysis?
No, it is not appropriate.
Now, right after that, Erik Menendez makes a statement with respect to the mother, okay?
Yes.
And would you characterize that statement as generally agreeing with what Dr. Oziel has just suggested or disagreeing with it?
Objection and proper opinion.
Overall.
In that line, he is talking about both mother and father and making a statement that does not agree.
Does it
with
disagree, though? He's saying there was no way she could live without my father, so does that somehow tie into the...
Yeah, it ties in, it adds to it, but it does tie in with that preceding statement.
And the preceding statement is the beginning of the discussion on this tape of the so-called mercy-killing theory. Is
Yes,
that
it
correct?
is.
Now, turning to page 6. Now, in this statement by Lyle Menendez that begins on line 4 and ends on line 7, is there another clue there that is not picked up on by Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
And what is the clue in that statement?
The word is problem, eliminate the problem. What
And-
problem?
Excuse me?
Yeah, the question would be what problem? That is not explored.
That's what you would ask if you were a therapist. When someone's talking about eliminating a problem, you'd want to know what it was?
Yes,
Dr. Oziel doesn't ask, does it?
correct.
Now, there is then this discourse starting at line 14 on page 6 by Lyle Menendez where he's talking about his mother's problems from the past.
Yes.
And you recall it takes a while to develop it in this tape, but at some point it's established that all of this heartache and misery...
Okay, let's not lead the witness.
All right. Is there a point in this tape where the timing of this problem of the mother is established?
Yes.
And when is it that all these conditions and feelings and troubles of the mother are dated to?
This is dated to 1986-87 time period.
Your Honor, move to strike as no foundation.
All right, again, would you establish that this witness is referring to something on the transcript?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to do
All right,
before,
why
Your
don't
Honor.
you do that?
Okay. Do you recall at a point in this transcript, Dr. Oziel asks Erik, when was it that he finds the suicide note and he has to listen to his mother crying, all of that? Do you remember that exchange?
Yes,
And
I do.
Erik says it was the first year that we moved here in 1987?
Yes.
And that's in this tape?
It's in the tape, yes.
Okay, and that's how you know what the dating of the
So
problem
again,
Yes.
you're leading the witness. Let's have her testify about these things.
Okay, well, we can take the time then, and we'll find out where it says it on the
Well,
transcript.
maybe the witness can find it.
Go ahead. Huh? I know how to find it. Well, first, let's go back to this. You see on page 3, on line 23, Lyle is talking about at the point when Erik found the suicide letter, he was living alone in New Jersey in the mansion that they had left.
Yes, it's on page 5.
And the other reference is on page 5.
Yes, 1987, line 16.
And that's when Erik is saying that the mother's misery dated from the year they first moved out here, 1987.
Yes.
Okay. So the problem as it is presented by Lyle Menendez on page 6, what he's talking about has to do with 1987.
Yes, it does.
And as a therapist, if a patient is telling you that he had to solve a problem and and the problem existed in 1987 and he's claiming to have solved it in 1989, would you ask, I thought this was 1987's problem, what's going on in 1989?
Yes, I would.
Do you see anywhere in this when either of the brothers is talking about the mother's misery and the mother's old problem, if you will, that he ever asks, wait a minute, that's all stuff from 2 years ago. What's going on in 89?
Objection argumentative.
Overruled.
He does not. He does not get a time dimension.
Well, does he ever ask, but what's happening just before?
No, he doesn't.
Now, is another significant thing that a therapist should follow up on what's called, and you're going to have to define this, negative transference?
Yes.
Okay, very briefly, what is negative transference?
Transference has to do with the feelings that exist between a patient and a therapist, and you can have positive or negative. And essentially, the negative would be for the negative feelings that are generally evoked from a prior relationship.
Okay, let me see if I can interpret that away. So if I don't like a significant person in my life, let's say I've had a lot of trouble with an older sister who raised me, let's say, and I'm in therapy and I'm being hostile towards my therapist, is it a sort of accepted notion in psychotherapy that what I may be doing is taking the hostility from the relationship with the older sister, transferring it to the therapist?
Yes. That's essentially, and they're both negative and positive. You could look at that relationship both from either way, but negative is always the negative feelings.
And is it limited to really significant relationships? I mean, if you're mad at your postman, you're not negatively transferring that to your therapist.
No, the feelings are generally to caretakers that have had the most contact with the person in their formative years.
Someone in authority, the way a therapist appears to be, isn't that the basic notion?
Yes.
Here's another authority type person.
Yes.
Is there an example here on page 7? Line 18, that's sort of a combination of both a metaphor and a negative transference, if you will.
Yes, it is.
And what is the reference there?
It's the reference to she was the worst psychologist ever.
Okay. And the she that's being referred to there is the mother?
Is the mother, right.
And why did you find this significant?
Because Dr. Oziel is a psychologist, and this is being said to the psychologist, and this would be something that would be very important from the transference aspect.
Do you think, did you interpret this to mean that Lyle Menendez was accusing Oziel of being a bad psychologist?
He is expressing his feelings vis-a-vis the mother and is expressing certainly negative aspects towards Dr. Oziel. We don't know what you can't see what they are with that one statement, but it needs to be explored.
And if you would explore it, could it lead to discovering hostility towards the therapist?
Hostility, there could be a lot of other issues, trust, safety, factors like that.
To deal with the issues of trust and safety, what's the significance of patient trust and patient feelings of safety in attempting successful therapy?
Those two elements are critical for there to be successful therapy.
Why is that?
Because if a person does not trust or feel safe in a situation, they're not going to be able to open up and to tell a person what's really on their, either in their thoughts or in their heart.
They're not going to tell the truth, in other words.
That's correct.
By the way, on this same page, page 7 at line 17, is there another example of Erik Menendez starting to say something and being cut off?
Yes.
And did you see the same thing happening on page 8 on line 16? Now happening to Lyle Menendez, where Dr. Oziel is cutting him off.
Yes, I do.
And do you also see here that right after Dr. Oziel interjects and makes the suggestion about the timing of something, that it comes after an affair, do you see Lyle Menendez using the same language as Dr. Oziel?
Yes, I do.
And the word he's using is affair.
It's the affair, yes.
Now, starting on page 9, this is in the middle of a time, just to orient you, Lyle Menendez is trying to explain to Dr. Oziel how he tried to be supportive of his mother and talk to her about the treatment that his father was giving her, and to commiserate and to offer her help.
Yes.
Okay. And has he indicated, he being Lyle Menendez, up until this point, page 9, line 7, has he indicated any hostility whatsoever in the four corners of this towards the mother?
No, he has not.
And now, does Dr. Oziel start to do something verbally here? And you've heard the tape, in tone of voice as well. Does he try to do something that you found was inappropriate?
Objection calls for speculation.
Overall.
What is he doing that you found was inappropriate?
Well, what he's actually doing is labeling a feeling, and he's trying to lead in terms of, did you actually get angry, are the words that he uses, and states that as his...
So he's trying to characterize the mother as being hostile towards Lyle.
Yes,
Okay, and Lyle hasn't said that yet.
that's right.
Okay. And, in fact, he still doesn't
Okay,
say...
counsel, let's not lead.
Okay. Do you find in the next statement by Lyle Menendez, does he pick up on Dr. Oziel's language here, or does he continue to say what he was saying?
No, he picks up on Dr. Oziel's language and then continues to describe the mother.
Okay. And if you turn to page 10, at the top of page 10, does Dr. Oziel do something verbally that you thought was inappropriate at line 3?
Yes, he does.
Now, what is he doing here?
He again is bringing in the anger feeling, and
Whose anger this time, though?
Lyle's anger
Okay, so now he's
moved from the mother,
the mother being angry at Lyle.
at Lyle, to now Lyle's anger.
And has Lyle, up until this point, indicated that he was angry at his mother?
No, he hasn't.
And when Dr. Oziel asks him this, how angering was that? First of all, is it appropriate to suggest to a patient that they were angry or had hostile feelings to someone when they haven't even described that?
It is not appropriate, and you should seek the question from the patient. In other words, you should say, how was that for you, or what. You should never lead and label a feeling because you don't know what that feeling is.
And how does Lyle react to that?
What Lyle does is he's taken back, and you can see him, he isn't even, it takes him a minute or two, actually 2 statements, to get this focused in. He says, what? And then to me, and then he's able to affirm, if you will, the anger. He does that again. It was extremely angering for me,
No.
so he adopts that language.
When a patient appears to be taken aback, that means that's not where their head was going?
That's right.
Something's being suggested to them that they weren't thinking about.
That's
Okay,
right.
again, let's not lead.
Okay. And so Dr. Oziel asks the question twice.
Yes.
And then does Lyle say, oh, it was extremely angering for me, and then explains what he means by that?
Yes, he does.
Based on his explanation, in your opinion, is he using the word anger appropriately there?
No, I don't think he's using it appropriately. I think that he has another feeling tone than what was suggested to him.
What is he describing there if it isn't anger?
It's really frustration.
And now on line 15, does Dr. Oziel do something that you found was inappropriate?
Yes.
What is he doing here?
What he now attempts to do is a manipulative type of situation to pit them against the mother, and he starts taking that tact, and he even he describes them as, and he ends with, as if you were an ingrate, so that he takes information and uses it in the context of what he's trying to set up.
Okay. And does it appear from what he's saying is that he's trying to get them to say that they were angry at the mother or had hostility for the mother?
Yes, he's been trying this for now 2 pages.
And he tries to get Erik drawn into this as well, doesn't she?
Yes, he pulls on line 20.
And does Lyle agree with him?
Yes, he does.
And is this the pattern that you see throughout, that Lyle is being agreeable with Dr. Oziel?
Yes, this is a pattern.
Let me call your attention to line 9 on this same page, where Lyle is saying it was extremely angering. She was putting me in the position to defend the things that my father was doing to me.
Yes.
Okay. Now, would you consider that a cue when you're talking to someone who has admitted that they have killed this person?
Yes.
Would you want to know what things?
Yes.
Is there any follow-up, any question about what things?
No.
In fact, Oziel says, uh-huh. Is that appropriate therapeutic method when you've been presented with a statement like that?
No.
Now, here, you notice on line 22, in this, what you've described as the manipulative section where Dr. Oziel's trying to foster this hostility, do you see he uses the word as if you were an ingrate?
Yes.
Has Lyle Menendez said, my mother made me feel like an ingrate, or anything like that before Dr. Oziel uses this label?
No, that's new language.
And it's Oziel's language.
And it's Oziel's, yes.
Now, what is Dr. Oziel doing? How would you characterize what he's doing at the bottom of page 10, starting at line 24?
What he appears to be doing, what he is doing is to try to get Lyle angry. And he's saying a lot of things about whether he's getting angry at what was being done.
Your Honor, I would just strike that as speculation.
As to the intent of Dr. Oziel or the
Yes.
reaction of
The intent of Dr. Oziel.
the objection sustained to that portion after that is stricken.
Do you see in this, this little speech of Dr. Oziel, starting at line 24, that he's saying basically negative things about the mother's behavior?
Yes.
And these are things that Lyle Menendez himself has not said.
He has never said those.
And is he characterizing it in such a way that she's being a bad person and Lyle was just trying to be helpful? I mean, trying to create a hostility.
Yes, he was trying to create a hostility.
The objection is again sustained, the answer is stricken.
Was there an objection?
It's the same question you asked before.
Well, I was trying to give a foundation for
Well,
it.
you still haven't.
Is it appropriate for a therapist to characterize to a patient his relationship with another person in negative terms when the patient hasn't so characterized the relationship?
No.
Is that suggestibility?
It's suggestibility, and it's, yes, and it's leading.
Let me ask you a hypothetical. If the therapist was not intending to get therapy at all, but was trying to get the patient to say negative and hostile things about a dead person, is this a useful method to do that?
It could be considered that, yes.
Now, after Dr. Oziel has said these negative things about the mother, looking at line 6, does Lyle agree with him and say negative, hostile things about the mother, or does he do something else?
Right, no, he does not agree with Dr. Oziel, and he, in the next line, blames himself and has regret and concern.
He
I
says,
wish he had tried harder with his mother.
so even though Dr. Oziel has sort of made all these excuses for him to be angry at his mother, he says he wished he had tried harder.
Yes.
And do you notice on this page 11, line 15, a portion where Erik starts to say something and is again cut off?
Yes.
Now, do you notice, starting on line 24, another one of these cues or clues that is not followed up on by Dr. Oziel at all?
Yes, I do.
And what is what you could consider a clue or a cue in there?
The statement, there was no way I could open up to her about the real issues, so that real issues is hinting that there is something more to be explored.
And of course, as Dr. Oziel say, what were the real issues?
He doesn't say that.
Now, is there, on page 12 at line 11, there is a statement by Lyle Menendez. And does this statement relate to any, in your, based on what you've seen here, does it seem to link up with anything Dr. Oziel has been saying?
Yes, it does.
And what is the significance to you of this particular statement of Lyle Menendez's?
What's important about this statement, and Lyle Menendez does have this in there, is that he refers back to what Dr. Oziel has mentioned before, and it is the theory on the mother and her misery, and that being a possible reason.
The mercy killing.
The mercy killing theory, yes.
And Lyle says specifically here, like you mentioned before?
Yes.
Now, do you know if, based on just reading this document, if Lyle there is referring to what Dr. Oziel mentioned when he postulated this theory earlier on this tape, or whether he's referring perhaps to what Dr. Oziel said on October 31st or November 2nd, or any other prior conversation?
There is back, it could be all three, but in this particular situation, there also is language earlier
By Dr.
by
Oziel.
Dr. Oziel.
Move to strike the speculation, Your Honor.
Well, the way it's answered, she's just indicated there is reference earlier, but the answer will stand. It's not speculation. Your next question, please.
Okay. Now, is there a point on this particular page, on page 12, I'll strike that. Let's move ahead to page, just wait. Page 15. Now, do you see on page 15, starting in a, well, in a statement by Dr. Oziel that begins on line 12, that he sort of shifts gears in the middle of this statement. He starts out saying one thing, and then he changes the subject.
Yes.
Okay. First, he starts out with talking about I'll strike that. Preceding this, there's been a discussion by Lyle Menendez of how his father talked to him about the nature of his marital relationship, how he had to control every aspect of it, or he didn't want to be married, basically.
Correct, yes.
Okay. And that was a discussion about the parents' marriage
Yes.
and the father's belief that he had a right to totally control the marriage.
Yes.
And do you see in this statement by Dr. Oziel that first he comments on what Lyle has just told him,
Yes.
and then he changes the subject?
Yes.
And what does he change the subject to?
He changes the subject to getting back to how much, I mean, it starts on line 15, is now for them to, or for Lyle to talk about how much killing your dad because of what he was doing, and how much do you feel you were doing it for other reasons. So he begins to question Lyle regarding the killing.
Well, isn't the question, though, how much were you killing your dad because of what he was doing to you?
Yes, he says that.
Or what he was doing to your mother?
That's right. And then what part of each? He's asking for this breakdown.
Yeah, what part was because of what he was doing to your mother versus what part was he doing to you? Is that what the question appears to be?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that's following a discussion about the father's control of the mother.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. And does Lyle reject part of this suggestion of Dr. Oziel's that the father was killed for what he was doing to the sons?
Yes, he rejects part of that, yes, in that first line on 21.
He says it was not because of what he was doing to me.
Yes.
And now that doesn't sound like a statement by Lyle Menendez that he killed his father because he was domineering and controlling and overpowered his life and gave him no freedom and he just couldn't live, or any of that stuff, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Argument has been proper for
Objection sustained, the answer is stricken.
You familiar with Dr. Oziel's testimony in this case?
Yes, I am.
And does this statement by Lyle Menendez that it was not because of what he was doing to me, is that consistent or inconsistent with Dr. Oziel's testimony?
Objection to proper same argument.
Sustained.
And now, is there a colloquy here on page 15 following that Lyle Menendez saying it was not because of what he was doing to me, where Lyle talks about how he wanted to separate from the family, didn't want any more money, didn't want to have anything to do with them, wanted to be self-supportive?
Yes, that's what he continues talking about.
So he doesn't follow up on Dr. Oziel's suggestion at this point that killing the father had anything whatsoever to do with him.
Correct.
Now, looking at page 16, line 20, is there, that's the beginning of a statement by Lyle Menendez.
Yes.
Is there another one of these clues or cues starting on line 21?
Yes, there is.
And what is the clue on line 21?
It's where Lyle Menendez says, I couldn't let him get away with this.
And does it, in analyzing this from the standpoint of therapy, can you understand from the context what it is that Lyle Menendez is talking about? Getting away with what?
Right, you don't know. This doesn't have any reference.
Well, isn't it following a discussion about what the father is doing to the mother?
Yes, that's true.
But is the problem with that that's old news?
That's old news, yes.
How old?
1987.
And is it something as a therapist, if someone told you that he killed someone because he couldn't let him get away with this, and this is 2.5 years ago, is that a clue you'd want to follow up?
Yes, definitely.
Could it mean another this? I couldn't let him get away with something else he was doing.
Yes.
And could it even mean, in a metaphorical sense, something else he's doing to somebody else?
Yes, it could.
Objection to counter speculation.
Sustained, the answer is stricken.
Now, did you, in looking over this transcript, form the opinion that there were times when Lyle Menendez is using the word mother as a metaphor for brother?
Yes, there were.
And is this one of the areas, both with this statement of Lyle Menendez is starting on line 20, and the follow-up statement he makes starting on line 26, a place where you're interpreting that he could be referring to what was happening to his brother rather than what was happening to his mother?
Objection to counter speculation.
Sustained as to the form of question, it's also leading.
Is it an appropriate interpretive skill for a therapist to try to interpret what the metaphors may mean?
Yes, it definitely is.
And did you, in applying that skill, interpret these metaphors in these statements of Lyle Menendez?
Yes, I did.
And how did you interpret them?
That is an interpretation.
You're asking her the process she used to do this interpretation?
No, I'm
Not any
asking her what her
conclusion?
interpretive conclusion was.
Well, let's see what her process was first,
Okay.
and how she did this.
Well, the process would be that there is statements that are made that are dated, and then there are vague statements that are made that need to be followed up on, and that when it continues between pages 16 and 17, it really needs to be clarified. There's just too much that's not clear that would require some more exploration.
Okay. Okay.
He even gives, I mean, there's just more language there that you'd want to follow up on.
What's the language you'd want to, I think we need a break, Your Honor. I think we need to follow up on the need for a break at this moment.
Okay?
Thank you.
All right.
I
Okay, we'll take
follow-
our recess, and we'll resume at 3:30. Ladies and gentlemen, don't discuss the matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll resume. You may continue your direct examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. I believe we were on page 17. Now, actually, starting at the bottom of page 16, there is a statement by Lyle Menendez. He's talking about something for his mother's sake, and then up to the top of page 17, he states that my father should be killed. There's no question. What he's doing, he's impossible to live with for myself and for myself based on what he's doing to my mother. Okay?
Yes.
Now, that, in listening to that and in reading it, does it appear that Lyle Menendez is talking in the present tense as of the time that the father's killed? What he is doing to my mother, not what he did do to my mother.
Correct.
Objection, improper opinion.
The objection is sustained. The answer is stricken. You're asking whether or not he was using a present tense and the words he was using at the time?
Well, I'm asking whether she interpreted it as the present tense and whether that had significance to her. That was my next question.
When you say interpreted, you mean the grammar is the present tense?
Well, yeah, whether it sounds like the present tense, whether that's how she understood it, whether that's what she's basing,
Well, those are separate things, whether you're going beyond the meaning of the words to the intent of the person speaking. So
No.
what is it that you're asking?
I'm asking if the plain meaning of the words as you heard it made it sound like he's talking about the present tense, what he's doing to my mother at the time that he is killed. Is that what you understood him to be saying?
At the time, correct.
At the time the father's killed?
Yes.
Okay. And did you consider this statement by Lyle Menendez, based on what he's doing to my mother, a potential metaphor?
Yes, I did.
And a metaphor for what?
Metaphor for brother.
And in the next line, line 9, does Dr. Oziel do something that at first looks appropriate?
Yes, he does.
What does he do?
Yes, he picks up on the statement based on what? So he is following the patient, and that's
Okay.
quite appropriate.
Okay. And if he had stopped there and actually asked the patient based on what, would that be the kind of technique that you would teach?
Yes.
Does he, however, stop there and wait for an answer?
Excuse me.
Too fast?
No, I just got distracted, I'm sorry. Based on that, it was your last question, I'm sorry.
Okay. To summarize it, it would be appropriate for a therapist, after a patient has used language based on what he's doing to my mother, for a
Yes.
therapist to say, based on what? Picking up the language of the patient.
Yes.
Okay. And if Dr. Oziel had stopped there and waited for Lyle Menendez to answer, would that be appropriate therapeutic technique?
Yes, it would be.
Does Dr. Oziel, though, stop and wait for Lyle Menendez to answer?
No, he doesn't.
What does he do?
He answers his own question. He
And-
then continues to give his own interpretation, his own language, his own, on all of these things that he wants, and then before he even finishes, he does one more thing.
What
He
does he-
changes the subject, and he asks another question about the disinheriting.
Okay, so first what he does after he answers his own question, he answers it by describing a person, from
Yes.
totally controlling everybody, being completely cold-blooded. Who's he describing there? And it's the father,
It's
isn't
the father he's describing on the cold-blooded, yes.
it? Okay, and then he changes the subject to the father having said that he disinherited the sons.
Yes.
And does Lyle respond to this colloquy of Dr. Oziel's having to do with inheritance?
Yes, he does give an answer.
And does this answer accept Dr. Oziel's theory about the father being bad because he disinherited them, or does he reject it?
No, he rejects it. He does not agree with Dr. Oziel.
And he does not agree, therefore, that there is a problem with the father because of the disinheriting.
That's correct.
Now, is there a point farther down on that page, though, where Lyle does, if you will, pick up on the theme of, or part of the theme of Dr. Oziel, that his father is a certain kind of person?
Yes, he does.
In what language does Lyle use to describe his father, looking, if you will, on line 26?
He uses the word overpowering
He uses the word strong as well.
and strong and ideal a little bit earlier.
He calls him the ideal father
Yes,
and strong and overpowering.
yes.
Does he use the words domineering?
No, he does not.
Does he use the word controlling?
No, he does not.
At any time, in fact, Dr. Burgess, in examining this entire conversation, does either Erik or Lyle Menendez refer to their father as domineering or controlling?
No, they do not.
And does Dr. Oziel use controlling liberally in describing the father?
Yes, he does.
Now, turning to page 18, is there something significant, first of all, on line 4, in Lyle talking about the killing of the parents in a significant way? I'm calling your attention to the phrase, "this thing that was necessary."
Yes, line 4.
And from a therapeutic standpoint, is his use of the word necessary in the context of this supposed discussion about a mercy killing, is that a significant clue?
Yes, it is.
Does Dr. Oziel pick up on it?
No, he does not.
And is it significant on line 6 that Lyle Menendez says he, meaning the father, had trained us like basic training?
Yes.
And is that something that a therapist presented with two children of a family who have killed a parent, and now one of those children is describing his life as basic training, is that significant?
Yes, that's very significant.
Why?
It refers now to the whole childhood and brings up that as the full experience, and it needs to be gone into in terms of what that's a fully explorable area.
Is basic training a description of what anybody involved in child development would call a healthy or a normal or a typical way of raising kids?
No, it isn't.
And is that a clue there that something may have been wrong here?
Yes.
And does Dr. Oziel respond at least to this statement that for 21 years, Lyle's saying that his life for 21 years was a basic training course?
Yes, Dr. Oziel does.
And he responds by asking, basic training to do what?
To do what, right.
Is that an appropriate response? To do what?
It doesn't show, for someone that's supposed to have some skills, it doesn't seem to be the most logical thing to say, but he does try to explore it.
Is it consistent throughout that Dr. Oziel constantly tries to shift the discussion to why the parents were killed and
Yes.
talk about the killing?
Objection calls for a conclusion on the part of the witness.
Sustained. The answer is stricken.
Have you found any place in this transcript where, without Dr. Oziel's prodding or suggestion to discuss the killing, that either of the defendants bring up the killing?
Objection calls for a conclusion on the part of the witness.
Sustained.
Was it significant to forming your opinions about the appropriateness of this therapeutic session or its reliability as a truth-determining device that Dr. Oziel is the one who's constantly shifting the discussion to killing the parents?
Objection, compound improper opinion.
And it assumes facts, not in evidence.
Well, I'd like to get the fact and evidence. If I could ask the original question, then did you analyze the entire transcript and the entire tape to see who, if there is just one person, keeps bringing up the killing?
Objection calls for a conclusion.
Overall, you can answer that question.
Yes, I did.
And who keeps bringing it up?
Dr. Oziel.
And does he even change the subject of what either of the defendants is
Okay,
talking
let's
about?
not lead the witness.
Okay. Does he bring it up in context, or does he bring it up out of context?
He brings it up out of context.
Now, following along on page 18, starting at line 9, does Lyle Menendez respond to Dr. Oziel's question about basic training to do what? With a
Yes.
statement about survival.
Yes, he does.
And is a statement about survival, when made by a child of a family where the children have killed the parents, a significant statement?
Yes, it is.
And if you were training a therapist on how to explore a patient telling you they were trained to survive, what would you tell them to ask?
The question that should come in here is to ask about survive in terms of the survival aspect. What, how, get the own experience. What was prompting that survival statement?
In other words, what was
very-
happening that made you feel you were
Yes.
trained to survive?
Yes.
Is that what Dr. Oziel does?
No, he again brings in, on line 10, he suggests two possibilities in his statement, by living without him or by killing him. So that comes in again.
And do both Erik Menendez and Lyle Menendez answer him?
Yes.
And in answering him, do they reject the notion that survival was by killing him?
Objection calls for a proper opinion by the witness.
Sustained.
Lyle Menendez says...
How do they answer the
Yeah,
question?
exactly. How do they answer it?
Yes, they reject this.
Lyle says
Described
it's...
as a conclusion on the part of the witness.
Sustained, the answer is stricken.
Just indicate what it is that Lyle says. When given these two options by Dr. Oziel, which one does he choose?
Lyle Menendez says on line 13, by living without him.
And then does Dr. Oziel do something inappropriate, starting at line 16?
Yes.
And how would you characterize what he's doing here?
What he is doing here, he starts arguing now with him, and he brings in his own theory. He says, because you've never really lived with him anyway, he doesn't in any way explore what Lyle Menendez has just said, and starts trying to interject his theory on this father-son closeness, this bond, this earlier statement that goes back to the earlier pages of the tape.
Where Lyle is talking about how he thought he was the ideal father?
Yes.
And Dr. Oziel is trying to discount that?
Yes, he is.
And does Lyle Menendez agree with him?
Lyle Menendez does, yes. On line 21, he first agrees, where he says, yeah, exactly, I mean. Then we have a statement where Erik Menendez comes in, and then Lyle comes back again and disagrees, saying, I felt the bond, though.
So Dr. Oziel is trying to say that there was no bond, there was nothing between you and your father, and basically Lyle rejects that and says, I felt a bond with my father.
Yes.
Now, when you listen to this section of the tape, based on the tone of voice and the way that Dr. Oziel was following up on statements made by the brothers, was he doing something vis-a-vis the fact of the homicide that you thought was highly inappropriate?
Yes.
What was he doing that for a therapist you would consider highly inappropriate?
What he was doing was to encourage the talk, really was encouraging that two things. One, that it not be fully explored, and second of all, he was approving in a certain way.
He was approving of homicide?
Yes.
Is that appropriate for a therapist?
No, it's not.
In your training and in the training that you give to your students, in a circumstance like this, where you're faced with patients who have done something bad, I suppose is as good a word as any,
Yes.
and there's expressions of regret and guilt and remorse, what is the appropriate goal of the therapy?
Appropriate goal of the therapist would be to get the patient to come to grips with that and what the next step is going to be in terms of the guilt and the remorse, and to move forward with this, not to keep it covered up.
And what is the appropriate next step, the ethical appropriate next step for a therapist to be working on with a patient like this?
Objection irrelevant.
Overall.
The next step is to come forward with this to the police
for the patient to come forward?
Yes.
To encourage the patient to come forward?
With the therapist support.
Is there anything in here that shows that Dr. Oziel was making any efforts to ready Lyle and Erik Menendez to come forward with this thing that they were feeling guilty about?
No.
Is there an indication in here that he is supporting a cover-up?
Yes, he is.
Judge, remove the strike as a conclusion on the part of the witness.
Sustain the answer, sir.
Now, I want to turn your attention to page 19. And this is a long statement by Lyle Menendez following up on the notion that he felt a bond with his father. He's talking here about, I guess would you characterize this as the good times? Times
Yes.
that he remembers with his father
Yes.
that were positive for him?
Yes.
And do you see him talking about his difficulty with his father in trying to express his, meaning Lyle Menendez's, genuine feelings and genuine emotion of love for his father?
Yes.
And he's describing how his father can't handle that.
Yes.
Now, would that be a significant topic and area to explore with a young man who has confessed to you that he killed this very father?
Yes, it would be.
And with the fact that he's saying he loved this man and he had genuine emotions to him, something that would make you want to question why this killing happened?
Yes. And his voice also changes. I think that's very important, that this is one time.
Point in the
Yes.
tape, Lyle's voice
Between 21
changes?
and 24, his voice becomes much softer and much more emotive.
Through most of this tape, would you characterize Lyle Menendez's voice as emotive?
No.
How would you characterize his voice, apart from the content?
Right. It's what we would call inhibited in terms of emotion. It is stoic. There is a kind of a stony monotone, matter-of-fact tone to it.
Does this tell you, when you listen to this, or as a therapist evaluating a patient, would this tell you, well, that must mean this patient doesn't feel any emotion or doesn't have any emotion?
No, that does not tell you that.
In this particular segment where he's actually describing emotions that he has, does he sound, does the affect match the words?
Yes, it does.
Now, it's true, is it not, Dr. Burgess, that Erik Menendez on this tape, during the portion where he does the bulk of his talking, sounds very different than his brother?
Yes, he does.
And how would you describe how he sounds?
Judge, pause for a conclusion on the part.
I'm sorry, the he being
Erik.
Erik sounds very emotive, has a lot of emotion, is crying. His tone is softer.
And does what he is saying match his being emotive about it?
Yes, it does.
Now, turning to page 20, and starting at line 7, there is this little speech here by Dr. Oziel, which starts out again with a question. Why did your dad have to die?
Yes.
Right? And did this sound to you like Oziel doesn't have a clue?
Correct.
And he says, in fact, I know why your mom had to die. That's this mercy theory.
Yes.
Okay. But why did he have to die?
Yes.
Right? Okay. Does he give either Erik or Lyle a chance to answer that question?
No, he again answers his own question.
And in answering the question, does he assume that it had something to do with the two of them?
What he does here is he begins to pit the brothers against the father. That's what becomes clear in this little speech.
Is this similar to what he tried to do with respect to pitting them against the mother earlier in the session?
Yes.
In order to evoke some anger or hatred statements about the mother?
Yes.
And he failed in that effort, did he not?
Yes, he did.
And he fails here as well.
Pause for a conclusion on the part of the witness, which is
Objection
right.
sustained. The answer is stricken. Sustained to the next question.
Okay. Now, in this particular section, does Dr. Oziel do something else that in your training and in your background is considered unethical?
Yes.
What does he do here?
He brings up conversation from another therapy session, or another session, we'll call it, and he uses it in this session.
He brings up information apparently he had from the father privately, does he not?
Yes, this is a...
Objection, excuse me, Your Honor. Calls for facts not in evidence. May we approach?
Well, I think I can straighten it out, Your Honor. It's right in the context here.
All right, objection is sustained. The answer is stricken. Yes, you may
Okay.
proceed.
All right. Why don't you read through the, starting at the end of line 8. It's clear to me how much he totally controlled the two of you.
Yes.
And then he shifts, and it's also clear when he'd talk about you when you weren't here.
Yes.
Okay, now who do you think the he is? Who did you understand the he to be in reading this?
I understood the he to be the father,
And when you weren't here, who's the you?
meaning the brothers.
And then he goes on to say he, being the father, was derogated,
Yes.
yeah, a word, about both of you in different ways.
Yes.
And then he elaborates on that, saying the father was judgmental of them and said negative things about them
Correct.
behind their back.
Yes.
Now, is that ethical?
No, that is not ethical.
If Mr. Menendez had said something with Dr. Oziel and the boys weren't present, is it appropriate for him then to go to the children and tell them this?
No, it is not.
And even if he's dead, is it ethical when a patient or a person you've been consulting with dies to then blab to the world or blab what he said?
No, it is not.
Now, you say, though, that this is to pit them against their father.
Yes.
Why do you say that?
Because he's bringing information in about the father, and he's saying very negative things. He's saying with the father, the disappointments, that they were weak in a certain way, and saying things like you could never be good enough. So that is trying to evoke a reaction in the brothers by bringing this information in.
An angry reaction against the father.
Yes.
That's like telling a child, Johnny said that you did something wrong, to get the child angry at Johnny.
Let's go on to something else. Ask a different question, please.
Okay. It's just an analogy, Your Honor.
Yes, it's a metaphor.
No, it's an analogy. And with respect to that, does Lyle Menendez, and not respect to that, no, in respect to what Dr. Oziel was doing, does Lyle Menendez express anger?
He doesn't express anger. He agrees. If you see on line 22 and 23, he keeps talking about the father and what happened. He told Erik about, and he goes into it more.
Well, he's talking there, is he not, about the fact that the father was critical
Yes.
about the Calabasas issue, which is what you understand to be a theft from a home in Calabasas.
Yes.
Correct? And so he's agreeing with Dr. Oziel. Oh, yeah, I know my father was critical of us.
Yes.
So that's not like news, and it...
No, and he doesn't get angry.
Right. And then Dr. Oziel, though, following that, further characterizes what the father thought or felt about the children.
Yes.
He uses a derogatory term, does he not, on line 28?
Yes.
He calls them stupid.
Yes.
And Lyle Menendez hasn't said my father called us stupid. That's Oziel's word.
That's right.
Now, turning to page 21, just hearkening back for a moment to 20, this particular colloquy began, did it not, with Dr. Oziel suggesting that the father had to die because of something having to do with the two of them?
Yes.
And now does Lyle ultimately respond to that suggestion in Dr. Oziel's previous speech?
Yes, he does.
And does he agree with that previous speech, or does he disagree?
He rejects it. He disagrees.
By saying he doesn't think it had anything to do with us.
Yes.
And he's still hooked into in this speech, it all had to do with how bad Dad was to Mom.
Yes.
And now he brings up this issue of politics.
Yes.
Dr. Burgess, do you understand this issue of politics as it's injected here? I mean, does this make any psychological sense to you as a therapist?
Objection irrelevant.
Is there anything about this issue of politics that should have been pursued?
Well, Dr. Oziel does interject and tries to continue it. We do see that on line 23. And then you see Lyle agreeing with the language of the word.
Dr. Oziel's word affair again.
Affair, right.
And Lyle agreeing with affair.
Yes.
But my question is, I guess, this. If you were in this situation and you have these two young men in front of you and they've killed their parents and they're talking about this theory that the mother was a mercy killing, and now the crisis is that dad's going to go into politics, okay?
Yes.
What kind of questioning would you want to do when presented with this, it was the politics theory?
Well, that's a new, there's something new that's come in that either means it has to be looked at in terms of a level of meaning, but it doesn't get at what they're feeling. It's just a change of subject, and it could either be explored that way, would be one way of handling it, or just asking them outright, what does this have to do with what we're talking about? It clearly is a change of subject, so that could be explored.
On the face of it, does it rationally have anything to do with what they're talking about?
No, it doesn't.
Objection, improper opinion of the strike.
You said you'd ask, what does it have to do with what we're talking about?
Yes.
Why would you ask that?
Objection, irrelevant.
Because it is introduced, it is an issue that does come in, it's a spontaneous issue, so you would want to follow it up, but not to interject one's own language or one's own conclusion about it.
I guess my question is, does it make psychological sense to you as a therapist, this interjection of politics?
No, it doesn't. That's what I'm saying. It doesn't make sense, so it has to be explored as to what the meaning really is.
And following as it does with Lyle saying, no, it had nothing to do with us, it only had to do with Mom, then he changes the subject to this politics issue.
Yes, but you always want to look at what comes just before it, and the real critical thing, I think, is on line 9, where if you want to go after something, it's Erik and I getting together. That's an important statement, because it changes right after that.
Okay, so he seemed to be saying something and then he changed the
Yes.
subject? And is it significant when someone changes the subject to something that appears unrelated,
Yes.
that they may be avoiding what they started to say?
Yes, that's where you'd go back to what was said just before the change of subject.
And does Dr. Oziel say, what do you mean it was Erik and you getting together?
No, he follows this new line of inquiry.
About politics.
Politics.
Now, on page 22, looking at the statement that Lyle Menendez makes starting on line 6, he sort of, again, ending up how politics was going to be his mother's doom, that sort. It was all over.
Yes.
Right? Very dramatic language, would you agree?
Yes.
Then he says, there was no escape.
Yes.
Now, did you consider that significant, the notion of someone having no escape from this family?
Yes.
And does, in fact, Dr. Oziel on this occasion pick up?
Yes, he does.
And what does he say here?
Yes, he asks no escape from what?
Okay.
He repeats it twice.
And he repeats it twice, like he really doesn't know.
Yes.
Okay. And then, do you recall how Lyle Menendez sounds on the tape when he starts to answer this?
Yes.
And how would you describe how he sounds on the tape? He says, no escape from, being separate from my dad in an intimate environment.
Yes.
All right. How would you describe how he sounded?
There is a great pause there, and you actually can almost count. There is a real hesitation, which is unusual, coming from this, what we've already heard. And then he launches into the end of the sentence, where he actually takes language that we've heard before from Dr. Oziel, so that there's a real switch, if you will, from no escape to this last part of the sentence.
Which is being separated from my dad?
Yes.
Does that sound evasive to you?
Yes, it does.
is it similar to what happened in the previous page when he started to talk about him and Erik getting together and then he changed the subject?
Yes, so you now have two examples, yes.
Is this something that patients do? I think you've already said patients don't just come in and start, ripping open their heart, laying all the painful stuff on the table.
Yes.
Is it typical in the course of therapy that a patient may start to talk about something sensitive that they don't want to tell you,
Yes.
and then they'll just shift gears in the middle, and when you put the two pieces together, it's sort of nonsense?
Yes, and you almost can see them censoring what they're going to say. So that's a very critical time to try to pick up because it's pretty obvious a lot of times.
Okay. And actually here, Dr. Oziel says something which we weren't able to hear on the tape, but then Lyle just continues talking about his mother and how bad things were for him at this time when she moved from Princeton to California.
Yes.
The old news.
The old news, yes.
And again, with this, when Lyle Menendez is talking about all this bad stuff that was going on in 1986, 1987, does Dr. Oziel say, wait a minute, that's old business. What was happening in 1989?
No, he does not.
He just sort of goes along with the flow of this conversation.
Yes, he does.
And that conversation about leaving New Jersey and how badly she felt and all the changes goes on for several pages until page 24, correct?
Yes.
Now, on page 24, you recall there's this large statement by Lyle Menendez starting at line 8 through line 24 where he is talking about this. He's talking about the fact that, at least from his perspective, the fact that his mother does not seem to know how much money his father is making, how much money is available to her in the family.
Yes.
And that's what he's talking about, how amazing it is that Mom doesn't know and how he had conversations with her about it.
Yes.
Does Dr. Oziel follow up on this, or does he change the subject?
He changed the subject.
And in changing the subject, does he use a word that he uses very, very frequently in this tape?
Yes, he does.
And what is the word that he uses here when he changes the subject?
He uses the word control.
Now, starting at page 24, line 25, when Dr. Oziel changes the subject to the father totally controlling the mother,
Yes.
through the next 3 pages to page 27, did I ask you, Dr. Burgess, to count how many times over those little less than 2.5 pages Dr. Oziel uses some form of the word control?
Yes, you did.
And how many times did he, well, first of all, did he use the word control or controlled or controlling in every single speech he makes
Yes.
between 24 and 27?
Objection made is speech.
Right. You're referring to each separate segment here that's identified on the transcript?
Exactly, Your Honor. Each segment were preceded by his initials.
Yes.
And when you add up how many times he used some form of the word control in each and every time he spoke on those pages, how many times did he use the word?
I counted 13 times.
And did either Erik or Lyle Menendez, over the same course of time in their remarks, did either one of them ever use the word control here?
No, they did not.
Now, in going through this, on the bottom of page 24, this is where Dr. Oziel changes the subject and talks about the father controlling the mother,
Yes.
and talking about he keeps control over her by not letting her know about the money, basically.
Yes.
Okay? And all Lyle does is he continues talking about the discussion he had with his mother.
That's correct.
And now, when Lyle finishes talking about, on page 25, line 16, the discussion he had with his mother about her ignorance of the finances, which he's apparently bringing her up to date on, Dr. Oziel agrees with Lyle, and then does he change the subject again?
No, he doesn't change the subject.
Well, does he then shift it to characterizing the father?
Yes, he does.
He says there's another part You see that where Dr. Oziel says, you say that, when you say that, I think you're right. And then he says, but there's another part of it, which is, to shorten it, your father was a totally controlling man.
Yes.
Now, that's a different subject matter than what Lyle Menendez has been talking about, isn't
Yes,
it?
it is.
And then Dr. Oziel goes on, starting at line 22, to do what?
He now goes into using the, talking about the father needing to have the mother completely subservient, and he uses much of the language he's used before in terms of the shell of a person and how to control someone, and how he can get someone totally under his control, which brings us up to line 15 on 26.
Okay.
That the way you keep somebody under control is not to let them have any money.
Okay, so this whole speech that ends with the end of side 1 has to do with him talking to them about all the ways in which their father controlled their mother. And
Yes.
he uses control in that little speech alone.
Yes.
Starting on 25, line 22, 4 times.
Yes.
Then the tape shifts over.
Yes.
And when the tape shifts over, does he change the subject?
No, he doesn't.
Well,
He
Does-
changes the subject to go to, he tries to draw Erik in.
well, let's look at 26, line 24. Before the tape turns over, you've just said Dr. Oziel's talking about how the father controls the mother.
Yes.
His opening line on the second side is to just completely control you.
Yes.
So now he's shifting to the control of the children,
Yes.
which has nothing whatsoever to do with what Lyle Menendez said that prompted this speech, does it?
No.
Argumentative meeting.
Sustain the answer strongly.
And does he then continue with this particular theme that the father controlled the sons up to line 12 of page 27?
Yes.
And in this speech, where he's talking about the father controlling the sons, which begins at line 24 on page 26, does he use the word control 6 times?
Yes.
And at the end of that speech, what does he do? Starting with line 10.
Okay, with line 10, he now wants to, he switches to Erik. He switches the questioning to Erik. What do you think, Erik? How about it? And saying we haven't said a lot.
And in fact, that's true. Eric's been pretty silent up to this
that's
point.
true.
So it appears that he's trying to get Erik to talk
Yes.
on the tape.
Yes.
And after 13 repetitions of the word control in the preceding few minutes, what is Erik's response when Dr. Oziel tries to get him to say things on this tape?
Erik?
Calls for conclusion on part of the witness.
All right, you have tied different things together, so
Okay.
raise the question.
What is Erik's response after this speech by Dr. Oziel in which he mentions control 13 times?
Erik's response is to say he rejects it. He doesn't like hearing it.
Okay? And he says that 3 times.
3
does he not?
times. Yes.
And he says he doesn't like hearing these things.
That's right.
Which are negative things that Dr. Oziel's been saying, are they not?
Yes, about his father.
About my father.
Yes.
And Menendez then agrees.
Yes, he
True.
does.
He doesn't like hearing it either.
That's right.
And does this, as a therapist, if you were in session with these 2 young men, does this sound like they hated their father?
No, it does not.
Does it sound like their state of mind with respect to the father is that he controlled them?
No, it does not.
And following along here, does Dr. Oziel do something appropriate at line 19 of page 27?
Yes, he does.
Is this the kind of question that is supposed to happen throughout the course of a therapy session?
Yes, he goes for the feeling. Yes.
And he asks Erik what he's feeling.
Yes.
And Erik says upset.
Yes, he does.
And when you listen to the tape, does he sound upset?
Yes, he does.
And then does Erik proceed to explain why he is upset?
Yes, he does.
And does he explain he's upset because he killed two people that he loved?
Yes, he did.
Objection calls for conclusion on part of the witness that speaks for herself.
Sustained.
Now, when Erik says that his father and his mother were two people that I loved, and I just don't want to hear anything about them, it doesn't matter what they were, okay?
Yes.
Does Dr. Oziel pick up on that? Well, wait a minute, if you loved them, why'd you kill them?
No, he does not.
And farther on in this statement by Erik Menendez, starting at line 27, when he said, I'll read the whole sentence, it starts on 26. They were very apparent in my mind before this, led up to the fact where I had no other choice.
Objection to the form of the question is argumentative.
I haven't finished the question.
Object becomes justice.
All right, you're asking the witness to read line 26 and the full sentence, is that right?
I wanted to just
Page
read
27.
27, I wanted to read 28.
Okay, the witness can read it to herself.
Okay. Read the two sentences
Have you-
where
have you
Erik
done that?
mentions
Yes,
he
I have.
Okay,
has
she's
no
done
choice.
that. You may ask
Okay.
your question.
Now, do you consider it significant that in a therapy session where a patient has said or agreed that a mother was killed in some form of mercy killing, if one of those patients then says this killing was because he had no choice, would you consider that a significant thing to follow up on?
Yes, I would.
Is having no choice consistent with a mercy killing?
No, it is not.
And again, on page 28, looking at line 4, does Erik again repeat that he had no choice at the time,
Yes, he does.
but he regrets it now?
Yes, he does.
Now, does Dr. Oziel try to explore this cognitive dissonance by asking, wait a minute, what do you mean you had no choice? I thought this was a mercy killing.
No, he does not.
Does he ask anything at all about what Erik is saying?
No, he does not.
And do you note on line 13 of page 28, Erik again repeats that he doesn't like hearing his father put in this sort of way,
Yes, he does say that.
meaning a negative way.
It's a negative, right?
And is that cognitively dissonant with the notion that that same person would himself describe his father in a negative way?
Yes.
And do you see anywhere in this transcript where Erik Menendez describes his father in a negative way?
No, I do not.
And again, on line 19, do you see Erik talking about his father as someone he loved and had no choice to do what he did?
I see that, yes.
Now, is it in the course of this therapy session, has the theme emerged prior to this point that the father was killed because of what he was doing to the mother?
Yes.
And is that cognitively dissonant with having no choice but to kill him?
It is.
Is it cognitively dissonant with the notion of no escape?
No, it's not.
Is it cognitively dissonant with the notion of a dangerous situation, which Lyle Menendez refers to at one point?
No, it is not.
Now, here, Erik also says he hates himself for doing it.
Yes.
And when he says that, is the affect consistent with what he's saying?
Yes, it is.
And did you note at that point in the tape specifically that he was crying more loudly than any other point?
Yes, he was.
And do you see on line 23 that Erik makes reference to a misconception of the family?
Yes, I see that.
And the fact that no one understood?
Yes.
And does Dr. Oziel follow up on those two notions, that there's something misconceived or misperceived about this family?
He does not.
And if you were in therapy with two children of a family who had killed their parents, would you explore this?
Yes.
Is this, like the basic training, some intimation of abuse?
Yes, it certainly is. And
again, on page 29, Does Erik talk about loving his father on line 4?
Yes, he does.
And does he also say on line 7 that he hated his father for what he did to his mother?
Yes.
But does he say he loved him again?
Yes, he does say that.
And then he talks of, does he not, something that was way beyond control. This is page 19, line 9.
Yes.
Is something way beyond control cognitively dissonant with a mercy killing on the one hand and a killing of the father to stop him from abusing the mother that you're killing?
Yes, it is.
Is it cognitively dissonant with the notion of self-defense?
No, it is not.
And do you see Dr. Oziel asks the question, what was beyond control?
Yes, I see that.
That's an appropriate question.
Yes, it is.
Does he give them a chance to answer it?
No.
Does he provide his own answer?
He provides his own answer.
And the answer he provides was that you had to kill him?
Yes.
Does that make any sense?
No, it doesn't.
And on the next line, when Erik says, eventually it had to happen, it was basically ruining my life, and I guess Lyle's.
Yes.
Are those significant statements?
Yes, they are.
Is eventually it had to happen cognitively dissonant with a mercy killing?
Yes, it is.
Is it was basically ruining my life cognitively dissonant with the notion that all that was wrong in this family was the way the father treated the mother?
Yes.
Overall, you can answer the question.
Yes, it was.
Does Dr. Oziel ever follow up on those two areas of cognitive dissonance?
No, he does not.
And on line if you were the therapist and you had heard everything that precedes this, and Erik Menendez said, it was basically ruining my life, what's the question that you would have asked?
The question right there is to get at what was ruining the life and try to explore this.
What is it he's talking about?
What's he talking about?
Now, being molested can ruin your life, can it not?
Yes, it can.
Line 15 of page 29, do you see Erik saying, I know that she loved me somehow, with reference to his mother?
Yes.
And does Dr. Oziel actually pick up on that somehow?
No.
Well,
He interrupts.
okay, he says, I know that she loved me somehow, and then Dr. Oziel says, couldn't ever tell you or show you?
Yes.
That the mother couldn't tell him or show him how she loved him.
Yes.
Okay? Maybe I'm wrong. I interpret that as picking up on the somehow. Am I being too generous here?
Objection argumentative.
Rephrase the question.
Okay. If a child says, I know my mommy loves me somehow, does that suggest to you that the child is wishful thinking, that the mother isn't showing it or saying it if the child uses the word somehow rather than because she hugs me, because she tells me, because she does things for me?
Yes.
Okay. And now, do you see Dr. Oziel doing something starting on line 19 of page 29 that's inappropriate?
Yes.
And what is he doing there?
He now brings in the mother's conversation. He says, I remember when your mom called, so that he's interjecting information that comes from other sources.
And is he changing the...
Yeah, he changes the subject.
And
yes.
what subject does he change it to?
He now changes to the issue of disinheritance.
So he's floating disinheritance past them again, is that
Yes.
correct? And does Erik agree with him? Oh, yes, disinheriting was a critical factor?
No, he doesn't.
Does he, in fact, ignore what...
He just ignores him.
And stays with what theme?
He stays with the issue of his mother, wishing he had the extremely close relationship so he could tell her everything that ever happened.
And if in this context of two children of a family who had killed their parents and you're supposedly in a therapy session and one of them tells you, I wish I could have told my mother everything that ever happened,
Yes.
is that something you'd follow up on?
Yes.
Would you ask, what is it you couldn't tell your mother?
Yes, you try to get at that information that he would want to have told her.
And does Dr. Oziel try to do that? What was the secrets you were keeping from your mother?
No, he doesn't.
And when Erik Menendez says in the course of this same explanation on page 30, starting at the end of line 9 and going to 10, when he says, I was raised that I couldn't tell her. Okay?
Yes.
Now you have a son telling you, a therapist, that he was raised in such a way that he couldn't tell his mother things.
Yes.
Would you explore that? Why couldn't you tell her?
Yes, you would.
And when Erik Menendez says on line 14 that he was never given a chance to get close to either of them, that from a very early age he was taught he couldn't get close to them,
Yes.
is that a strong indication of some kind of psychological abuse?
Yes.
Does Dr. Oziel ask the kinds of questions that a therapist who's exploring child abuse would be expected to ask?
No, he does not.
All he does is confirm that the family way was to not talk about feelings,
Yes. He
but
can-
not find out what it was that was going on that kept people separated?
Right.
Now, do you see Dr. Oziel asking on line 21, did you ever try to tell your mother or talk with your mother about what your dad was doing?
Yes, I see that.
And Erik's response was, no way, I couldn't face that.
Yes.
Now, he goes on in this paragraph to allude to the fact that he couldn't face talking to his mother about what his father was doing to his mother. He wraps it back into that all the problems were mom's problems.
Yes.
Okay. But is there something about the particular strength of his answer that to you as a therapist would have been a very strong clue?
Yes.
And a very strong clue to the existence of problems between him and the father.
Yes.
A strong clue that it's what his dad was doing to him that he couldn't tell his mother.
Yes.
Yes, the last questions were leading.
Yes, they were, Your Honor, but it is.
Objection is sustained. The answer is stricken.
Okay. Then I shall ask it non-leading. What would the strong reaction of Erik Menendez suggest to you?
He starts right out saying he can't face that and left that up to my brother. That is one area to start right there. What was left up to the brother?
Okay.
So that's one area. What couldn't he face? And you can almost take each line and further explore it. He just does not do that. I would have to leave. What does that mean? That comes down to line 27. There are a lot of just small phrases that could be picked up on.
With respect to, though, the fact that all of this follows a question by Oziel, did you ever try to tell your mom, not ask, or talk with your mom about what your dad was doing? Does his strong reaction tell you something about what he's interpreting that question to mean?
Sustained.
When he says, no way, I couldn't face that, is that cognitively dissonant with the notion that what he couldn't face was talking to his mother about what his father was doing to his mother?
Sustained.
Does that make sense to you in a psychological way as a reaction to the question about talking to his mother about what his father was doing to his mother?
Objection irrelevant and proper.
Sustained.
Dr. Burgess, is it your opinion that in this particular phrase, no way, I couldn't face that, I left that up to my brother, Erik is talking about something other than what his father is doing to his mother?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Well, this isn't her expert opinion interpreting this.
All right. Is she basing it solely upon these words in this transcript?
Solely upon the way he...
Have her answer it then
Okay.
in that fashion.
Based solely upon the way he responds.
I mean, the tone of voice or the words
Tone of
used?
voice, the strength of the words that he uses in response to what Dr. Oziel says about, did you ever try to tell your mom or talk with your mom about what your dad was doing?
And
Okay?
based solely upon the content of this transcript, you're asking, does she have an opinion?
Yes. Upon that, do you have an opinion about whether Erik Menendez is actually answering that with respect to what his father's doing to his mother?
Yes, I
Okay.
know. Yes.
What's your opinion?
My opinion is that is not what he is referring to.
What, in your opinion, is he referring to?
He's referring to a current situation, not an old situation.
A current situation as of August 20th, 1989.
Back.
Objection, move to strike the speculation part of the witness.
Which answer? Which question?
I'm sorry, the last answer and the question that she's answered right now.
So you're objecting to the
I'm sorry,
question before this last one?
Yes, I'm sorry. I
And the
am.
answer.
Speculation.
All right, the objection is sustained to the last question, and that answer will be stricken. The other answer's already been given. There's no objection. It'll stand.
Now, do you see on page 31, Erik is this is still Erik talking. And do you see him talking about how he was, starting on line 6, he was taught to love his father, and he wanted to love his father?
Yes?
And is there any follow-up by Dr. Oziel of these feelings of love as he's expressing them here?
No?
And now when he talks about facing the fact that his mother had to be killed, it was the only way out for her,
Yes?
is there any follow-up of that by Dr. Oziel?
No.
And does it appear that at this point, after I don't know how many minutes, that Erik is agreeing with the theory that Oziel started out with in the beginning about mercy killing?
Objection, proper opinion.
Sustained.
Is there any explanation up until this point, well, is there any explanation both up until this point and after about why this was the only way out for the mother, apart from the mercy-killing theme that's been played out by Lyle Menendez and by Dr. Oziel?
Objection calls for conclusion on the part of the witness.
Sustained.
Did you find in this transcript any other explanation by Erik Menendez, by Lyle Menendez, by Dr. Oziel, of why the mother was killed apart from the mercy killing?
Objection calls for conclusion.
Sustained. The transcript speaks for itself.
Okay. Would you point out to me, Dr. Burgess, any place in the transcript where a different theory of the killing of the mother besides mercy killing occurred?
Same objection.
Sustained. Let's move on.
Now, at the bottom of page 31, starting at line 21, do you see the point where Erik Menendez starts describing a dream he had?
Yes, I do.
And what is the significance to you as a therapist of this particular dream?
This dream is expressing a suicide wish.
And in this particular therapy session, does Dr. Oziel ever treat Erik's suicide potential?
Objection, lack of foundation.
Well, based on what's on the tape, we don't know what's...
I mean, what was discussed here, whether it was addressed by Dr. Oziel and the
Yes, whether
responses?
anything that's happening here is the appropriate therapeutic response to a patient who's talking about suicidal ideation.
No, I don't see him addressing that.
And you also see on page 32, line 10, Erik talking about how hard it is for him that no one knows the truth, and they can't relate to him or what he's going through because they don't know that he killed his parents.
That's right.
And is that... as a therapist, if a patient expresses this kind of feeling, does that tell you something about their desire to confess?
Yes.
When you talked before about the fact that the appropriate goal of a therapist who had two patients before you in the situation, if you will, of these two young men, was to try to get them in a place where they could go to the authorities and say what they had done. Were you taking into consideration this apparent desire on the part of Erik Menendez to confess?
Yes, I was.
And again, here on page 32, starting at line 15, there's a speech by Dr. Oziel. Does this seem to be like an apologia, like an acceptance or a support for the homicides?
Objection, proper opinion.
Sustained.
Does he appear here to be, well, what is he doing here?
Well, he's interjecting his own ideas. He gives these are his own ideas. He's suggestive. He doesn't follow up on something that's absolutely critical. The word truth is just mentioned 2 lines above. So he just, again, rejects anything that's being said by either brother.
Give us the citation to where the word truth is.
Line 11.
Where Erik talks about that everyone now, they don't know the truth.
Truth, yes.
This
What
has
truth?
to
Yes.
do with his desire to confess.
Truth is a very good word to explore.
When a patient says nobody knows the truth, what's the therapist supposed to ask?
Get at what the truth they're talking about. Get
What's-
that to be explored.
What's the truth?
What's the truth? Right.
Oziel doesn't ask what the truth is. No, he doesn't. And again, on starting at line 27 on page 32, does Dr. Oziel do something here that he has done before that's inappropriate in this session?
Yes, he uses that technique again where he gets into the trying to get some feeling, stimulate some feelings, some hostility, the blaming.
Feelings and hostility by whom, towards whom?
He's trying to evoke that in the brothers.
Towards whom?
This one is for the father, I think.
No, I think it's,
For the mother?
yeah, for the mother. If you read it, that you were blamed.
Oh, her, yes, at the bottom. He switches, I think, over to the, yes, on the bottom on page 28, line 28.
Yeah,
Here
starting
you're
at line
loving her
20,
and
he's
trying to
talking.
care for her.
This appears to be similar to what he did earlier, trying to get them to say something hostile about their mother.
Yes.
Now, turning to page 34, again, looking for clues or things that should have been followed up. This is where Erik Menendez is talking about, first of all, what his expectations were about what his life was going to be like in college,
Yes.
if his parents were alive. And then he mentioned, starting on line 7, that he and Lyle definitely had different kind of relationship with our parents.
Yes.
And they had different ways of dealing with them and dealt with the parents differently.
Yes.
And then Erik says, like I got scared.
Yes.
Now, would you consider that significant?
Yes, that's a feeling that certainly would want to be explored.
And significant for him in talking about his relationship with his parents to talk about being scared?
Yes, that's a new word introduced.
And is that cognitively dissonant from the notion of a mercy killing?
Yes.
And then does he go on to talk about his concerns about Lyle and that Lyle might commit suicide?
Yes, he does.
And is this the point when Dr. Oziel starts this touchy-feely part of the session?
Your turn, Amanda.
Overall.
Yes, it is.
Trying to get them to look at each other.
Yes, face each other, yes.
And what is, you've indicated before the jury heard, before the blue jury heard this tape, that this was highly inappropriate and manipulative in this session.
Yes.
And you note that even at the very beginning of this, on the bottom of page 34, line 26, he's saying, Erik, no, come on, look at him, tell your brother.
Yes.
And from that, do you would you assume that Erik is not cooperating?
Yes.
Objection calls for speculation.
Right, as to the form of the question, objection sustained.
What
The
do
answer is stricken.
what do you infer from Dr. Oziel saying, Erik, no, come on, look at him, tell your brother?
That he's not looking at him.
Okay. And then do you see Dr. Oziel saying on page 35, line 3, again, no, got to be tough and strong.
Yes.
And is that appropriate?
No, that's not appropriate.
Why not?
Because you're going against what the patient is trying to tell you. You're forcing. It's a forced situation. You have somebody protesting.
Is it particularly inappropriate or more inappropriate when previous in this session Both of these patients have been talking about very serious matters and talking about emotions.
Yes,
And one of them has been crying for about 10 minutes.
yes.
Is it inappropriate to try to force a patient to do things they're not emotionally ready to do?
Yes, it certainly is.
Does this, and in fact, if you note, even at this point when Dr. Oziel is doing this, Erik is crying.
Erik is crying, yes.
Is it appropriate to do this kind of confrontational therapy with a visibly upset patient?
No, it is not.
What do you make, Dr. Burgess, of Dr. Oziel's statement on line 15, page 35? Apparently directed at Lyle Menendez. I know you stepped in and sort of saved him. Do you have any idea what he's talking about?
No, I don't.
Does that fit with anything that's been said on this tape?
No, it doesn't. Not coming from Dr. Oziel.
Now, turning to page 36, are we still at this section where Erik is crying and Dr. Oziel is trying to get them to do this thing he wants them to do?
Yes.
Now, turning your attention to line 8 of page 36, you see that he's addressing this to Erik Menendez,
Yes.
and you see that he starts to say, "You told me that between the two of you."
Yes.
And a little later on in the session, does it become clear that this conversation he's referring to between him and Erik happened in confidence,
Yes, it did.
in a session?
Yes.
So is it appropriate? What is Dr. Oziel doing here?
He's breaching confidentiality.
And is this the only time on this tape where he ignores confidentiality?
Noted.
Cause for conclusion.
Sustained, the answer is stricken.
Which one? No, it isn't?
I'm sorry?
Is it the no, it isn't answer that was stricken? The last answer?
The answer is stricken. The objection is sustained to the question. The answer.
Just for a moment to jump ahead to page 39. Line 24. Do you see Dr. Oziel saying, "And I know how much Erik loves you because when you were not here," meaning Lyle was not here, "it's okay if I tell him, Erik? Is it all right?" And with no answer. He told me...
Objection misstates the tape.
All right, regardless of that, you're directing the witness's attention to lines 25 and 26 and 27 of page 39. Do you see those?
Exactly.
Yes, I do.
Okay, she's read them, and your question.
All right. Is that a breach of confidentiality by Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
Objection calls for speculation on the part of the witness.
All right, rephrase the question. Does it appear to be
Does it appear to be, and in your opinion, was it?
Objection, improper opinion, lack of foundation.
overall?
Yes.
Why is it a breach of confidentiality?
He states it in a positive, and he doesn't get a clear statement from Erik, who he's asking, but he just goes ahead and says it.
And what is he saying? I mean, why is this thing, how do you know this is a breach of confidentiality?
Because he says, because when you're not here.
So it appears that he's telling Lyle something Erik said to him alone.
Yes, he's taking it from another time.
If a person has more than one patient in therapy who are related to each other and who may have issues, therapeutic and psychological issues between them,
Yes.
is that a dual relationship?
Yes.
Are dual relationships to be avoided?
Yes, they are.
And is one of the problems with dual relationships just this kind of thing, breaches of confidentiality?
Yes.
Now, that is another kind of dual relationship than the kind of dual relationship when a patient gets involved in business and other relationships with patients.
Yes.
But that's also a dual relationship.
Yes.
Okay, so we were back at the first breach of confidentiality that appears here on page 36, line 8.
Yes.
Okay, now, moving down to line 14, do you see Lyle Menendez saying the whole family worked behind closed doors?
Yes.
Is that a significant statement, given the circumstances under which these young men are before Dr. Oziel?
Yes.
Does he follow up on it?
No, he doesn't.
Now, do you see something else here inappropriate that Dr. Oziel is doing on line 21?
Yes.
And what's he doing there?
He's really pitting Lyle against Erik when he says, remember how hurt you were when Erik told me what happened. And I remember the hurt and pain they didn't talk with you about it first.
Yes, you notice he doesn't say, I remember how angry you were, or I remember how you threatened me. Do you notice that that's missing?
Objection, argumentative.
Sustained.
Do you know what Dr. Oziel is referring to here?
Objection calls for speculation.
Sustained.
Are you aware that there was a session with Erik Menendez on October 31st when he told Dr. Oziel he was involved in the killing of his parents?
Yes.
Do you recall that Lyle Menendez was, at Dr. Oziel's insistence, invited to come over?
Objection misstates the testimony.
Sustained.
Do you recall that Lyle Menendez was called and Dr. Oziel talked to him, and following that, Lyle Menendez went to Dr. Oziel's office?
Yes.
And do you recall that Lyle Menendez was described by Dr. Oziel as having a very dramatic reaction to learning that his brother had talked about the killing of the parents?
Yes.
Your Honor, I would object to this as going beyond the scope.
All right, it's going beyond the content of this, so let's get back to
Okay.
what it is that you're asking.
When you read this section, okay, remember how hurt you were when Erik told me what happened, and I remember the hurt and the pain. You felt really violated. It was real painful for you, okay?
Yes.
Did you, based on the information from the testimony in this case that you were exposed to, relate that to the October 31st session?
Yes.
Now, do you see that farther down on page 36, line 27, Lyle Menendez refers to the tragedy of the family?
Yes.
Is that a significant phrase for you, given the circumstances under which these young men are with Dr. Oziel?
Yes. Yes.
Does Dr. Oziel follow up on that?
No, he doesn't.
Now, turning to page 38. Are we still in the place where Dr. Oziel is encouraging this confrontational therapy, if you will?
Yes.
And is this where he's laughing at the brothers?
Yes, line 21.
And rude language aside, do you see that Lyle Menendez says, we hate that hugging shit, by the way, we fucking hate that?
Yes.
Is that significant to you that Lyle Menendez is talking about this hatred for this physical contact with a brother that he's already told Dr. Oziel he loves very much?
Yes.
What's the significance of that to you?
There's several significances, but one that it certainly speaks to the touching, the having contact, and that's something that he is saying that he doesn't want.
And why is that significant?
Well, that should be followed up, but what it really means is that there are persons, especially untreated, abused children, don't like to be touched.
That's typical?
One example, yes.
And does Dr. Oziel follow up?
No, he doesn't follow up.
Does he do something inappropriate?
Yes, he does.
What does he do?
He quite clearly says, you know what, I don't care. He negates the protest, the strong protest that Lyle has given to this particular technique.
And he's saying, when he says, I don't care, he's saying, I don't care how you feel, isn't he?
That's right.
Now, you listened 5-6 times to this tape. You listened to Dr. Oziel's voice on this tape.
Yes.
You listened to the tone of voice he used with the Menendez brothers.
Yes.
And he got real quiet and real gentle at some points.
Yes, he did.
And the way he talks to them on this tape.
Yes.
Did you also read the transcripts of the so-called notes that he dictated of October 31st and November 2nd?
Yes.
Does he talk about them there in these same touchy-feely tones as he uses in this tape?
Pardon me, that's argumentative.
Sustained.
Does he talk about them there in a similar way as what he does in this tape-recorded session?
Objection, irrelevant.
Sustained.
Do you see a difference in the kind of language Dr. Oziel uses about and with the Menendez brothers during this versus what he dictates behind their back?
Objection, irrelevant and argumentative.
Sustained.
Is it sadistic for a therapist in dealing with people who have been discussing very serious and traumatic matters, one of whom has been crying, the other of whom has been talking about emotion? Is it sadistic to say, I don't care how you feel?
Objection, improper opinion, argumentative.
Overruled.
Yes.
Your Honor, may we approach vis-a-vis scheduling?
How much longer is your direct examination going to be of this witness?
That's what I wanted to approach to discuss with you.
Well, just give me a clue as to how long you think it'll be.
Okay, well, it depends on whether I'm as tired as I am now. Tired as I am now, it takes longer than not tired, in all honesty. So if we break and I have till the next session, I will probably finish with her fairly quickly.
How long is
in
quickly?
front of
'Cause
both juries.
You did tell me you had about
That-
45 minutes to go when we resumed, so that would have been about 4:15 or so.
Not
So,
bad,
yeah.
not bad.
We're still going, so how much longer do you think it'll be?
Probably joint before both juries, about 10 minutes, and then about 15 minutes in front of just the blue folk.
All right, so what's going to happen then is that there'll be cross-examination before both juries after
Right.
the direct examination has been completed. So you're saying you have 10 minutes more of direct examination before both juries, is that it?
Does that seem right to everybody? Unless other people have agendas. 15 maybe? Just 4 questions? 10 minutes.
All right, 10 minutes, and then cross-examination. Any idea how long your cross-examination would be?
Hopefully I will.
Okay, and then there would be some additional testimony before the blue jury, and then further cross perhaps, and further the way things work. There probably might just possibly be redirect examination. You never know after the cross-examination, but
Possibly, just might be,
So
maybe.
what will happen is that we'll be going probably with this witness tomorrow morning, and then perhaps shift gears with some other witnesses in the afternoon. So it's about 4 minutes to 5 now, and we'll take a recess until tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Don't discuss this matter with anyone. Don't form any final opinions about it. We'll see you back tomorrow at 9 o'clock.